Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll take your seats, we'll get started. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the appropriations hearings. I want to welcome the Chairman from the House, Chairman England. We're glad to see you. We look forward to working with you. We've got a very active week coming up. Let me take a second and allow Chairman England to offer any comments that you'd like to make. I believe your mic is on.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to all the House members and the Senate members. A few of you are new to the process, and I hope you enjoy it. It's kind of like going to the dentist without an anesthetic at different points in time. But anyway, I'm sorry there, Senator Coggins. We've got a big job ahead of us, and I trust that all of you are ready to work and dig into it just as Senator Hill and I are. And we look forward to it. We've got a special guest standing outside the door this morning, so I'm going to stop at this point and turn it back over to Senator Hill.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Mr. Doorkeeper, do we have a visitor back there?
Mr. Chairman, the Honorable Nathan Deal, Governor of the great state of Georgia, waits to address this committee.
Mr. Doorkeeper, admit His Excellency the Governor to the Appropriations Chamber.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, you can't say we didn't get off to a memorable start in this administration. Glad to be able to get back to work, as I'm sure that you are. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. I hope it will not be the last. I think that it is important for the governor's office and the legislative branches to work cooperatively together, because we are all here to do what's best for the people of the state of Georgia, and that's the reason that I would like to talk to you today. As you are probably going to recognize, much of what I'm going to mention to you was contained in my State of the State address, so please forgive the duplication, but I think it is a highlight of the areas that we think are important for your consideration. First of all, let's start with some of the good news. And I think that there are some key factors and indicators that are consistent with showing that businesses in Georgia are beginning to rebound from this global recession. Compared with last year, more Georgians are working. Unemployment insurance claims are running well below year-ago levels. Average hours worked per week in the private sector has increased. Wage and salary income has grown in each of the last 2 quarters. Georgia consumers are showing more confidence. Spending is up about 5% for the first 6 months of this fiscal year. The Georgia Purchasing Managers Institute Index indicates that expansion of our manufacturing sector is occurring. Well, that's the good news. But I think all of you know that we still face a very difficult challenge when it comes to budgeting. Our economy is not where we want it to be, and it will not be there, in my opinion, until we make some real sustained progress in reducing unemployment and underemployment. For that reason, I believe we should err on the side of caution. I do not believe we should spend additional revenue if actual collections, in fact, were good enough to exceed our estimate. We must replenish the revenue shortfall reserve, and that's what I think hopefully you will be committed with me to doing. And I commend you in that regard for last year raising the authorized limits for that reserve fund. I believe that was the prudent, wise thing to do. That said, let me present to you the highlights of my amended fiscal year 2011 budget. First of all, I am reducing the revenue estimate in the budget by a little over $27.5 million. The primary reason for that reduction is that the fees that were being counted on have not produced the revenue that was anticipated, and I believe it is wise for us to make that reduction accordingly. In education, to cover the midterm adjustment for QBE and the shortfall for non-certified personnel health insurance costs, my budget proposes that 1% of the revenue shortfall reserve be appropriated for K through 12. There will be no reductions in QBE, equalization grants, or for state schools. I'm recommending that the state agencies reduce their spending on an average of 4% for the remainder of the fiscal year. Now, they are currently withholding the 4% level, so hopefully that will be something that can be achieved without any significant pain. Those savings will help us accomplish a number of key objectives. First of all, we have to replace the lost enhanced federal Medicaid funds. As you know, those enhanced FMAP allocations are no longer available to us. We need to fund the disproportionate share hospitals, and my budget proposes almost $20 million for the One Georgia Authority, which, as you know, promotes economic development in rural Georgia. Funding of the DOJ settlement is a requirement so that mental health patients and developmentally disabled individuals can be transferred from the state hospitals into community service settings, which of course is in accordance with the settlement agreement that has been reached with our state. Now let's move to fiscal year 2012 budget. I'm setting the revenue estimate based on a modest 3.75%. That's 3.75% increase over the amended 2011 recommendations. I think you all know that the greatest challenge in 2012 is going to be replacing almost $1 billion of the federal stimulus funding that we will not have available to us. In order to keep our budget in balance, state agencies must reduce their spending by an average of 7%. This will mean 4 straight years of budget reductions for our agencies, and it behooves us to recognize the professionalism and the can-do attitude that has been shown by these individuals and agencies in getting the job done in these very challenging times. These agency reductions, however, as I propose them, are not uniform, but are designed to give priority funding to what I consider to be the core responsibilities of state government. As I've made it clear, education is the top priority of this administration, and this budget reflects that. In education, though we don't have revenues to restore the prior year reductions, my fiscal year 2012 budget will have a net increase of $30 million in K through 12 formula funding. There will be no reduction in the equalization grants. Earlier this past school year, during the school year, the Federal Education Jobs Bill directed $322 million to Georgia schools. Local school systems were required, of course, to spend those funds before the end of the calendar year. They should have been able to set aside local money that was transplanted by those federal funds and have those local funds available to carry forward into fiscal year 2012. Beyond these numbers, we've taken additional measures to help Georgia schools manage this downturn. We've given all schools flexibility regarding class size. Systems entering into the IE Square contracts or becoming charter systems have been able to gain additional flexibility in exchange for greater accountability. And that is an issue that I want to continue to have a dialogue with you about, because I do believe that flexibility at the local school board level will give us the opportunity to make even the dollars that we're talking about here today go even further. Another theme that you have heard me repeat, and one that I know that you are all committed to doing, and that is to preserving hope. Hope is now on an unsustainable course. Dipping into revenue reserves at an alarming rate is exactly what has occurred. Without action, Hope will be unable to fund its obligations in fiscal year 2013. And as you know, we'll be talking about fiscal year 2013 this time next year. Because we must act now, my 2012 budget does not authorize Hope and pre-K expenditures beyond what the lottery fund is producing. I look forward to working with you in order to determine the path forward that is best in order to protect hope for our children and our grandchildren. Now let's talk about health care. That's a big one, as you all know. Health care costs have continued to be a major portion of the budgetary challenge, and the recent federal legislation has compounded that burden. We are told that looking at what the federal legislation would require, we would add approximately 650,000 Georgians to the Medicaid rolls. This mandated expansion will cost Georgia Medicaid an additional $2.5 billion over the next 10 years. One measure I propose to tackle this issue is a new Medicaid eligibility system. Because I've placed this initiative in my bond package, I will discuss it in just a moment when I outline my bond recommendations. I look forward to working with you and our healthcare community to determine the best course of action to do several things. One, to protect the quality of care and to manage the Medicaid expenditures within the context of our state budget. If you haven't gathered it by now, I'm a fiscal conservative. I campaigned as a fiscal conservative, and in keeping with that approach to government, my budgets have one eye on operations and the other on the balance sheet and long-term sustainability. Georgia is one of only 8 states in the nation with a AAA bond rating at all 3 major bond rating services. I intend for us to keep it that way, and with your help, we will do exactly that. That's why my proposed bond package is $563 million. That's approximately 50% smaller than bond packages in recent years. But I believe that that bond package has some very important ingredients included. The following are a highlight of some of them. $231 million for K through 12 construction, equipment, and buses. $15 million to fund STEM charter schools that focus on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, areas that, as you know, are very important to our global competitiveness. $46 million for reservoir development, $35 million for water and sewer infrastructure, $32 million for the deepening of the Savannah Harbor, $50 million for repairs and renovations in the university system, $28 million for upgrades at our technical colleges, and $10 million for the Medicaid eligibility system I referred to earlier. This new system, which could be developed and implemented using matching federal funds, would integrate Peach Care and Medicaid and would be interoperable with TANF and food stamp eligibility. It would reduce downtime and would speed up the responses for people who are seeking help in any of those respective areas. Now, hopefully I have captured the high points of my budget recommendations today. I want to reiterate in closing that I value cooperation. I know that we won't move this state forward unless we all are headed in the same general direction, and I look forward to working together with you. I'm now going to turn it over, Mr. Chairman, to our state economist, Ken Hegney, and he will give you more details on the current economic trends and the state revenue picture. I appreciate, in closing, the opportunity to be with you and talk with you today. I look forward to working with your committees of jurisdiction and with the body as a whole, and I am greatly honored to be able to serve as your governor. Ken?
Morning, Ken. Ken, let me make an announcement before we start. I'd just like to remind everybody that this room is very tight because of both appropriations committees, and that if you are an appropriations member and you have not found a seat, we're going to have some more chairs brought in. It gets a little better after the first day, but it's almost always this way. But I would also say that if you're a legislator and you're sitting in this area and you're not on the appropriations committee, I would ask that you relinquish that seat to a member. That is, of course, one of the privileges of serving on the appropriations committee. You get to sit in here during these hearings and listen. We welcome legislators to come, but if you're not a member, I'd appreciate it very much if you'd relinquish those seats. If you're a member of the committee and you have not found a seat, give us a few minutes. We've ordered some more chairs, and we'll, if necessary, we'll line these up. Are there any empty seats that we don't see? Anybody got one next to them? You got one? Okay. If there's a member in the back that can see right over here, the side of Senator Butterworth. Okay, great. Ken, go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for the invitation to be here. What I plan to do today is update you on the revenue estimates built into the budget. And I plan to address three main topics. First, the year-to-date tax revenue performance. Second, the economic outlook and trends and what the forecast scenario is for the state and for the nation. And then review the revenue estimates for the amended budget and the current and the fiscal year 2012 budget. So far, year-to-date growth has been strong. This shows the individual income tax revenue growth. Overall, individual income tax is up about 7.9%. You can see there's a bulging growth at the beginning of this fiscal year. That reflects a change in refunds in part. We carried a lot of refunds into the beginning of fiscal year 2010. Those were processed in the end of the fiscal year, and so we had a large decrease in refunds paid, and that boosted growth. But the good news is, if you look at the trend, it's still going up. So we're still seeing improvement in the underlying factors of the individual income tax. Sales tax revenue growth is up about 6.5% year to date. The blue line shows gross sales tax collections. So that's the total taxable spend by businesses, consumers, households in the state of Georgia. The red line shows the net revenue after distributions to local governments have been made. And again, you can see that that blue line is continuing to trend up. So again, we see taxable spending improving even as we get into the end of the calendar year. So again, a positive sign for the underlying state of the economy. And then one that's much harder to read, which is the corporate income tax. So far, year to date, it's down almost 1%. It's a very volatile revenue source. You can see that we've gone from minus 40% growth to plus 45% growth in a matter of a few months. So it's very volatile, hard to read. But overall, over the first 6 months of the fiscal year, we're down about 1%. Along with all the other tax revenues, growth year-to-date has been pretty strong at 8.1%. And you can see month by month there how we've performed. A very strong August reflecting that refund effect, but then pretty strong and strengthening growth as we've moved further into the fiscal year. Now, the next 2 months, January, February, those are still two of the very large negative months we'll be comparing to from last year. And then as we get into the last 4 months of the year, much more stable conditions, so growth will probably be a little bit harder to come by. This chart highlights the strengths and weaknesses of what we've seen year to date. And at the top, you can see that individual and corporate refunds, the change in those amounts to about $200 million out of about $590 million in total tax revenue growth year to date. So growth has been fueled in large part by refunds. But the other good news is we see pretty significant growth in sales tax, individual withholding, which is tied to jobs and salaries. So that suggests improvement in the economy. The negatives are that we're still seeing decreases in corporate and individual estimated payments year over year, and we're seeing still decreases in individual returns. And that's really important because as we get into the next, the February to June period, our revenue mix starts to shift to those sources which are still underperforming a year ago levels. In terms of the economy, I just wanted to make 4 brief points. One is the national economy has been growing since the middle of 2009, so well over a year and a half. We're seeing consumer spending grow. That's in Georgia, we're seeing that as indicated by the improvement in our sales tax collections, but nationally we're seeing other indicators. We're seeing some improvement in labor markets, but again, it's not yet strong enough here to bring down unemployment. And when I look at all the things that could derail the economy, I think probably domestically the biggest single factor is still housing. So this chart shows growth in real GDP at the national level. As you can see, we've had about 5 consecutive quarters of growth. This goes through the third quarter of 2010, and we expect the fourth quarter to be positive and probably stronger than the third quarter. So again, a good long run of economic growth nationally. And part of that is tied to retail sales. You can see when the worst of the recession hit, total retail sales plummeted nationally, but they've now recovered and now back to the previous pre-recession peak. So that indicates consumers are getting a little more comfortable in spending, although it appears that most of that are higher end consumers, high income people. And we're also seeing improvements in durables. That's another indicator that people are more confident in their status. Durables are long-lived things like cars, so people are willing to take a loan out, buy a car, confident that they'll be able to make the payments over the next 4 to 5 years. Now, one thing that gives me pause is the yellow line shows retail sales, that blue line shows consumer confidence. So there's been a bit of a disconnect between overall consumer confidence and the recovery in sales. I think part of that is due to the dichotomy between wealthy consumers and more middle-class consumers. You see the high-end retailers doing very well, the Walmarts of the world not doing quite as well. I think that's reflected in the consumer confidence numbers. In terms of national employment, we're seeing pretty consistent growth. The yellow line shows private employment only. The blue bars show total employment, which includes federal, state, and local governments. As you can see, there's a bulge in that total employment in the early part of 2010. That reflects the census hiring and laying off that went on. But you see that private employment's fairly steady, a little over 100,000 new jobs a month. Unfortunately, that's not enough to really bring down unemployment over time. The labor force would tend to grow more quickly than that. In Georgia, we're seeing year-over-year growth almost back to flat. You know, we lost well over 300,000 jobs, peak to trough. We're now almost even with where we were a year ago and expect for that to continue to move up. The other thing to know here is how closely in sync we are with the overall U.S. economy. So as we continue to see the U.S. economy improve, we expect Georgia's economy to improve as well. The governor mentioned these statistics. We're seeing other labor market indicators that are improving. The green line shows year-over-year changes in average hourly earnings of private employees, and the blue bars are average weekly hours worked. And again, in general, those are improving. And that's typically a precursor to more hiring as the employers use their existing workforce more intensely, working them more hours, that over time that will tend to lead to new hiring. The governor also mentioned we've seen personal income growing. We've seen The blue bars show total personal income. The red line shows only wage and salary income. So again, you can see how tough the recession was, with labor income falling by as much as 6%. We're now up to modest growth of about 2% year over year. But again, moving in the right direction, personal income growth strengthening, wage and salary income strengthening. Again, an indicator that the labor market, although still weak, is slowly improving. And then the big concern in my mind is the housing sector. We had seen a recovery in prices both nationally and locally in the Atlanta metro area. But in the last 3 or 4 months, we've seen prices begin to fall again. The other indicators for housing are still weak. Construction employment is still down. Foreclosures are still rising. Delinquencies are fading a bit, so that's good news, suggesting that that pipeline of foreclosures to come is starting to moderate. But we're not seeing any increase in new construction permitting. So again, the housing sector is very weak, and no real sign it's ready to turn yet. So the forecast scenario that underlies this budget is that overall the recovery will continue, it will accelerate, and it will be boosted by the payroll cuts that the U.S. Congress enacted at the end of the calendar year. We expect labor markets to strengthen and fairly quickly achieve consistent net job growth month after month. Consumer spending will rebound, although it won't get back to the heady days of the early 2000s. And we expect inflation to remain relatively low. Your core inflation is still declining. Overall consumer inflation is still very moderate, and we expect that to continue for the year and a half of this budget cycle. And then we expect housing really to be at the bottom, so it's neutral in terms of growth, but no longer a drag, but no boost to the economy in the near term. So in terms of the revenue estimate, this chart just summarizes the main points. Total taxes are expected to grow about 4.2%. That reflects in part revenue from allowing several sales tax exemptions to expire, elimination of the exemption from the insurance premium tax for care management organizations, and additional DOR enforcement actions. That's in addition to the underlying organic growth. Fees and sales are expected to grow about 90.8%. That reflects in part adjustments to the existing fee structure and the implementation of the hospital provider fee. And then the growth in other funds reflects use of lottery reserves and the appropriation of the mid-year adjustment. Overall general fund growth is expected to be about 8.6%. Total revenues available grow 11.1%. In fiscal year 2012, tax growth is expected to be about 6.1%, and that reflects the underlying organic growth in the economy. Although the growth rates will remain below kind of the historical average during growth periods. That reflects the weakness in housing in part. We expect fees and sales to decrease about 19%. That reflects the loss of the one-time funds from the monetization of GFA loans. And then the other funds available decrease by about 35%. That reflects no planned use of the lottery reserve and no mid-year adjustment. When you put that all together, you have a total revenue available increase of less than 1%. Just to highlight the point I made about the moderate rates of growth in taxes compared to historicals. This chart shows individual income tax. The blue is the period from 98 forward, historical, and then the red is what's built into the revenue forecast. As you can see, these growth rates are well below the peak rates achieved in the 2005 through 2007 period and from the 98 to about 2001. So although it's good growth, it's not what we've experienced in prior growth periods. And same point here for corporate income tax, and then for the sales tax. Solid growth, but not overly aggressive. And then the final point is the 5-year outlook for revenues. Our revenues peaked in, general fund revenues peaked in 2007, fiscal year 2007. With this forecast, we'll regain that peak in about fiscal year 2015. So although we are in recovery mode, it is a long way back to where we were. So,
Okay. I had a question on the effects. Have you hung a number on what you think the effects of the withholding tax cut by the feds will have on Georgia's economy? Is there a state number floating around?
We've not tried to do that. That's an exercise we intend to go through. We did not, this revenue forecast was set before that action was taken, so the effects of that on the economy and then on the tax revenue have not really been factored into this forecast. So that's a potential for some upside to our forecast.
Is there a national number that they expect to?
I'll have to research that for you.
Okay. Senator Hooks.
Thank you, Ken, for that excellent report and update on about where we are. Let me ask you, first of all, let me make a statement. I congratulate the governor and you on the bond indebtedness package. I felt for a number of years we were far too high in the degree of bonds that we were floating, and we've got it now in a conservative range, and I'm glad to see that as far as the figure. Now, in the 1990s, early 1990s, in the Miller administration, we raised fees. And we were told if we raised, we were in a terrible financial downturn, and he came in with a package of raising certain fees, all the way from marriage license to driver's license to everything else. So anyway, we raised those fees, and we were able to balance the budget partly on those fees. Now, what the governor has said this morning and said the other day is that the fees that we raised, that we were told would bring the budget up, that we based it on our current budget, would be partially included in the fees. And what he's saying now is, the fees are not working as we thought. The question is, and I don't mean to be specific, did we attack the wrong fees? Have we got the wrong information? I mean, or maybe the fees hadn't caught up, or the calendar year hadn't caught up with what we expect the fees to do. Obviously, the fees are not fair. So, I mean, why and what can we do about it?
The 3 fee categories are underperforming their revenue expectation. The first is the court filing fee, and what it turned out was that people filing a proceeding could move to magistrate court instead of the state courts, and that allowed them to avoid that part of that fee, and so that's underperforming relative to the original expectation. The second fee was the hospital provider fee, and part of that was to meet federal government requirements. One of the fees had to be lowered a bit. And then the revenue estimate was based on one set of hospital data. The bill that was passed specified another set. And once the fee change, the rate change, and that new data set were taken into account, that fee was found to be about, I think it was about $12 or $13 million below the expectation. And then the other fee is the set of fees associated under the name super speeder fines. Part of that is a lag in the ramp up, and part of it seems to be that the number of citations, for example, written for the super speeder fine are about what they expected, but the actual collections are lagging. It could be that the legal process reduces the fine. It could be people aren't paying, and then some of the reinstatement fees people are not paying. People are apparently driving with a suspended license rather than pay that fine. So those are the three main categories that are underperforming and are reflected in the budget.
Representative Lucas.
Yes. Can you tell me what you all have come up with as far as the projection on the percentage of the growth on lottery funds from previous years up to now? Not the spending, but just the projection on the percentage of growth.
The Lottery Corporation provides that estimate, but the growth in the underlying revenue stream is not very much. It's in the 2 to 3% range is what I recall.
From previous years?
From last year to what's in the 2012 budget. Small growth. So I think this is a phenomenon every state has seen, that the lotteries grow quickly for a while and then they begin to top out, and it's harder and harder to drive growth from lotteries.
Senator Williams.
Good question. Maybe you can enlighten me. The governor's revenue estimate, he indicated 3.75% increase in his revenue estimate.
For 2012?
Right.
Versus the 3.9. I think that's just a rounding error in one of our calculations.
And you came up with less than 1%.
Oh, I think he was talking about general fund revenues as opposed to total funds available.
Okay.
Thank you. The corporate income tax is projected as an increase in the revenue estimate. While the economy seems to be spinning up, won't many companies have net carry forward losses at the federal and state level, and is that accounted for? Well, because there's a fairly substantial increase between 11 and 12, given those carry forward losses.
We expect by 2012 a lot of those losses to have been taken out of the system. We're seeing the payment stream essentially be neutral this year, a little down a little bit depending on what components you're looking at. We built in extra revenue for the assessment activities that associated with revenues put into the budget last year. And then we expect some of the refund activity to decrease because we saw a very large ramp up in corporate refunds over the last year and a half associated with some of those losses. And now those are starting to work out of the system. So really, if you look at the 12 revenue and the fiscal year 2010 revenue, although it's a 10% growth over 11, it's about even with fiscal year 2010.
So it is accounted for then?
Yeah, to the best of our ability. Yeah.
Senator Williams.
One of the things that concerns me more than anything is the price of gasoline going to $4 or $5, and you know, filling up your car goes from $50 to $80, and just what that does to folks spending mentally. And have you calculated what do you think fuel's going to do, and have you calculated in this to your estimate?
We expect. Excuse me. We're not projecting a $4 gasoline in the next year. I mean, that's certainly a possibility. We've seen prices go from around $2 up to $4 and then back well below $3. It's a very volatile revenue stream. What I think we find is that when it goes way up, it then tends to fall back down within 4 to 5 months. The assumption is that energy prices, gasoline in particular, will rise around 3% per year on average. If we do have a rapid run-up to, essentially a 30% increase or more, that would have negative effects on spending, probably negative effects on the manufacturing sector as other energy prices move up. So that's, I mentioned there's a long list of risk factors facing the economy. I highlighted housing. Certainly energy is another one that could be mentioned as well.
Senator Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the super speeder and the fact that those fees have not been what we expected them to be. I believe it was $23 million we were hoping it would be. What is the actual amount?
What I recall in this budget, it's down around a little over $10 million.
A little over 10?
Yes, sir.
Any idea how we missed that so much?
I think there was what I understand, the Department of Driver Services estimated their fee structure. There was a longer ramp up than originally expected. So they didn't correctly account for the ramp up in the citations and then the lag in collecting money. It appears that some super speeders are getting their speed reduced in the legal process, so they just pay the regular fine instead of the higher fine, because the number of citations issued are basically on track with their estimate. And then I don't think they anticipated the degree to which people would not pay the reinstatement fee to get their license back if they lost their license. So I think it's those factors.
Okay, I don't see any more questions, Ken. We appreciate very much your coming out this morning. It's good information and gives us reason to hope for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I can only give the new chairman credit for us being on time and early, but we're going to adjourn for lunch now and be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much. Did it, man. Keep us on schedule, man. You're a legend.
You ready? Yeah, we got it. Ladies and gentlemen, if we can have your attention, we have our newly elected superintendent of schools, Dr. John Barge, here this afternoon to bring us up to speed on the Department of Education and what's going on there, and tell us a little bit about their budget request. And we're going to give the floor to Dr. Barge at this time, or Superintendent Barge. Which do you go by? Dr. Super or Super Doctor? Or?
Doesn't matter. Superintendent's fine.
Just as long as you spell it right.
I'm not hung up on the title. That's fine.
Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And thank all of you for the opportunity to present to you today. Our Chief Financial Officer, Scott Austin, is here with me, and he will walk through a few of the details with you. But I would like to take a moment to talk with you first about our budget and about the direction of the DOE. I have tremendous respect for Governor Deal and the difficult job that he has in putting together a balanced budget with limited resources. And I respect the task that each of you have that's before you in making the tough decisions throughout this process. I think that most of us as educators knew that the budget could be tough for K-12 education, and I would like to thank the governor for his consideration to the K-12 budget and to QBE, which is the money that goes directly to our students. While there are still some issues for local systems when it comes to their local revenues, their property tax digests, their decreased collection of taxes, I think that the governor's budget seeks to strike a physically sound balance in tough times for K-12 education. It will continue to be a new day in education as we continue to try to do more and achieve more with limited resources. You know, I personally look at the challenging economic times that we're in similarly to the way that we found ourselves in a drought several years ago in the state of Georgia. The drought forced us to look at the way we use water. The drought forced us to look at conservation. There's been a lot of good that has come from that. We personally all had to probably look at the way that we use water. We had to look at possibly delaying some purchases, some renovation projects. We all had to alternate the days in which we watered our landscape. We all had to make sacrifices. It also forced us to look at long-term solutions, like reservoirs. That's part of the key part of the governor's budget this year, which at the time we may not have considered those critical priorities, but the drought forced us to look at those. We all had to tighten our belts during that time. And I see our budget within the Department of Education kind of in a similar light. If you review the budget, as you review the budget, you will see areas of reductions kind of across the board in a lot of areas. And that is sort of symbolic to the drought in that we spread out. We're forced to look at the areas that we're spending our resources and try to determine where can we conserve. What are the long-term solutions? Once we've done this, I believe that we will ultimately be better positioned to educate our children. It will require us to look for new ways to provide services and to support our schools. We must continue to evaluate all that we do, determining in this financial crisis which things are truly essential and focus on doing those things well. The most important thing for me is that we get results for our students so that they have the opportunity for success when they leave us. That's what matters. We're committed to working with the governor and the legislature in refining this budget in the spirit of tough financial times while serving the needs of our students. We are prepared to make hard decisions called for by these trying times while keeping the end in mind, and that is the preparation of our children for productive futures. Our commitment is to provide input to the governor and to you, the legislature, as we move forward, cutting what must be cut while providing the world-class education that is expected of us. As long as I'm superintendent at the Department of Education, we will continue working to better leverage technology, bringing our curriculum into the 21st century and enabling us to do some of that more with less mentality. We're already working to create greater efficiencies within our department, modeling physically sound practices for local governing systems. I'm committed to making the DOE the most efficient and customer service-focused agency in the state of Georgia. We are committed to the better management of our resources given to us by the citizens of Georgia. Before I turn the meeting over to Scott to go through with you specific details of the budget, I want to address a couple of issues that I think many of you communicated to me, parents communicated to me on the campaign trail, and even the governor has communicated to us as a department some of the things that we see as priorities as we move forward in this new administration. One of those is our high school math curriculum. Many of you have talked with us about that and the need to look at that. There's no doubt that our standards are very strong and they're very rigorous. And many of us don't want to lose the rigor of our standards. I think the biggest issue with it has been the delivery of those standards, and that is something that we're looking at, and we have an immediate solution as requested by the governor recently that we can propose to him very shortly, and a long-term solution that I think will be appealing to all parties involved in that we're basically boiling down to options and giving flexibility to systems in how we deliver our world-class rigorous curriculum. Additionally, another rule or another issue that has come up is the graduation rule and the single diploma. I think that It's very good for us to have the same high expectations for all students, but I think the part that we need to look at is that we need to have multiple pathways for our students to get to that single diploma. And there's no reason why we can't have rigorous expectations of students while tailoring a graduation plan that fits their needs and suits their needs. So as we move forward, I look forward to presenting these multiple pathways to you when the time comes, and I look forward to working with all of you throughout this legislative session and throughout my tenure as your state school superintendent. At this time, I will turn it over to Scott Austin to walk you through the specifics of the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Superintendent Barge. It's a pleasure to see you all today. Just to manage your expectations, I know that I will have an opportunity to stand here as much as you'd like me to be here. So I'm actually not going to go through great detail, but I do want to point out to you some of the areas that the State Board and Superintendent Barge have brought up. As many of you know, this budget is a reflection in great part of, while it's the governor's submission, it is a reflection in great part of the work that the State Board puts in when we make our submission as it relates to how we should address the budget crisis in this particular year and next. Governor Perdue had asked the agency to provide 3 different views for this year and next. I won't give them to you now, but I will say that as it relates to supplemental, 11 supplemental, it is, at least for K-12 budget, it appears that the 4% view is the predominant view that that is being recommended. I will say that is a view, that 4% reduction view is very consistent with the Governor Perdue's instructions as it related to what we needed as an agency to be managing toward. So as you read through this and you see 4% or you're doing the math and it's 4%, do know that while programmatically we didn't reduce everything by 4%, a 4% reduction is consistent with most of the operating units and what we were planning for. 2012 will be a little different. There is again a view. It's a larger cut view, but we have done something similar, and that's the 8%. So starting with 11 supplemental, and I should mention, I'm sorry, that I have a summary of what I believe you're looking at as the governor's book, and so I'm going to start for 11 supplemental on page 109, which is really the summary of the program changes. We do have copies of the budget if you all have, I know at the end you may have questions. So agricultural education, I'll mention this one. I won't mention each program, but here is an example. It is a 4% reduction. It is consistent with the view that the governor had instructed us to manage toward. We have already reduced allocations in our grants. These are primarily grant funds that go out to the different school systems. These grants have already been reduced. We've accomplished that with relatively minimal programmatic impact. Again, that has to do with what's going on in the environment. So when I say relatively little programmatic impact, that of course is in relation to what is happening statewide with all education funding. Central office is an area where we've actually reduced slightly less than 4%, and I do want to address that. We have spoken at great length about that, and we continue to be committed, as Superintendent Barge mentioned, to making certain that we are as efficient as possible. And of course, the central office is the area that everybody likes to make sure we're being efficient in, and we are. 1/3 of it, a little redundant, 1/3 of that approximate spend is for information technology, IT, and many of you have heard about the LDS project, a longitudinal data system. I'm going to open the invitation, and I have spoken with some of you. We are going to be hosting presentations for House Senate members who are interested in seeing the longitudinal data system as it is today. It is working. It's not completely rolled out, but there is a schedule. Our goal is to make certain that we close the loop with you in terms of that confidence gap that we had in the past, to make sure that you all see from the teacher perspective, from the principal perspective, and from the local school superintendent's perspective, just what it is that they are now able to do that they weren't able to do prior. That spend continues to be a driver in this year's budget. It is one of the reasons that the governor agreed to not reduce down to the full 4%. and I just thought I would point that out. The other third of our budget tends to be in the central office, the typical staff activities, myself, the Chief Financial Officer, the State Board of Education, policy, et cetera. We have made significant reductions in that business, in that organization over the past several years, over 30%. And so I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to go and address that in more detail. But again, the point I want to convey to you all is that we are looking very closely, and Superintendent Barge has challenged us to look even more closely, as has our State Board, at identifying any positions or any expenditures that can be redistributed or eliminated, whichever the case may be. The charter schools, this is an example in this particular cut. It is over 4%. It should not be viewed as any sort of a programmatic prioritization or lack of priority. It is, in fact, a reflection of a recommendation from the State Board. In the charter schools budget, there is a line referred to as planning grants, and you'll see this both this year and next. Those planning grants, some years back, were $2,000 grants that went to community organizers who were interested in exploring the idea of a charter school. They have evolved into, on average, about an $8,000 grant that the department has been making to charter applicants who are actually a bit more matured in terms of the process. Our commitment has been to make the charter process more streamlined. We currently have a pipeline, a robust pipeline of charter applicants, and so the thought is, from a prioritization standpoint, the planning grants are not really a need to have anymore. And so we are recommending a larger reduction here and elimination of those grants for 2012. And programmatically, we believe that the impact will be minimal. We do have a slight reduction of 4% then to the other part of the charter schools grant, which is very important, and those are the funds that go to the charter schools to support their facilities and operations, because many of these charter schools do not receive capital outlay funding. So we do prioritize that, and please don't. So hopefully you'll see in the notes that we are in fact targeting that reduction to the planning grants. The facilities and maintenance and operations portion we do believe is important, as does the Office of Planning, Budget, and Governor Deal. Curriculum, and I'm going to skip over a few. I'll certainly come back to them, and I know I'll be back to each one later, next week probably. But in any event, curriculum development, you'll see there is a larger than 4% reduction. That is another targeted reduction of a software program. It's really a search engine. It's referred to as Galileo. We operate that in tandem with the library system. It's been with us for some time. There are many folks throughout the state who find that to be a very useful application. However, it does, from our perspective, rise to the level of very good to have and nice to have, and not necessarily a need to have. And so in the curriculum area, curriculum development, we continue to be, we have recommended elimination of the Galileo contract, at least our portion of it, and maintain all of the spending or main activities that will relate to improving math and ELA. Many of you may remember last year, Governor Perdue and others instructed this budget unit to reorganize so that they would be very focused on Common Core, again, in particular math and ELA. In 12 and future years, we'll be moving that focus toward continuing, I'm sure, some math follow-up, but also really moving and adjusting to science, which will be a core curriculum area that will be coming up in fiscal year 2012. The federal programs, there are a lot of changes. I'm sure they may be some of your questions, but there really are no, other than the reductions in ARA monies that have come in. You probably are familiar with them. I'll be happy to address them individually or at the end. But suffice it to say that the ARA programs that came in are now going away. And that's one of the reasons, of course, that the state is having such a problem in next fiscal year, and not just the Department of Education, but throughout the state. But these funds are going away, and as they go away, we have to amend them out. And, of course, in the process, you all will officially approve them to be amended out. But I assure you, they are gone or they need to be amended out. And unfortunately, we can't continue to spend them beyond the period where the feds have allowed us to do so. GLRS is a federal program, so there is no change there. The Georgia virtual school reduction of 2% is slightly less than 4%. Again, the reason there is coming into the fiscal year 11 budget, we made a commitment, or we were instructed to facilitate 1,700 additional slots. A slot is, if you will, a course taken by a student, not a full day, but a course taken by a student. We added 1,700 slots without additional funding for this year. That is, I believe, the reason for it being the reduction in virtual school being slightly less than the 4%. Again, as Superintendent Barge mentioned to you as well, we are absolutely looking toward the virtual school platform to roll out a lot of the efficiency enhancing opportunities that we have for remediation and those kinds of things. So from a prioritization perspective, we believe the virtual school is exceptionally important. It will become more important in helping school systems to meet their needs and to educate in a cost-effective manner. And the reason it is less than a 4% reduction is because we have already taken a reduction by having an additional 1,700 slots. The Governor's Honors Program, here this reduction is 4%, but I will say it's a very specific reduction. It relates to one of our staff members that we have been holding vacant. We still have a continuing staff person who is able to manage the program. That's a little different than what we're going to be seeing in fiscal year 12. So I do want to point it out. I know Governor's Honors is very important. It's very important to us as well. But as it relates to the 2011 budget, the $41,000 that you see, $44,000 that you see, is a reflection of a staff vacancy where we did not hire the person. Information Technology Services, that is actually the program that relates to the K-12 network. It's a contract with AT&T, used to be Bell South. This represents 1/4 of the total cost. The federal government actually pays for the other 3/4 of the contract cost. The monies for the K-12 network do not actually, the federal monies for the K-12 network do not actually flow through our budget. This was a negotiated contract and not opportunities to reduce it. We will be looking and continue to look at ways that we can enhance the contract. We have in fact doubled or tripled the bandwidth, which, and by that I mean the speed, under the contract. Most of our schools now have the speed that they've been asking for, at least what we were able to provide in the K-12 network. This particular contract is also critical from our perspective because it sets a service level and pricing level that from which local school systems can purchase additional capacity at a certain level of quality and at a certain price. So we do feel, firstly, it's important, obviously, because it's technology. This gets the bandwidth down to the central offices, but it also allows the school systems to leverage the contract. And so we've not wanted to go back and try and renegotiate too much because, from our perspective, we have gotten additional bandwidth, we have gotten additional service level commitments, last mile access, et cetera, and many of our school systems have told us that this contract is critical to their operations. The National Science Center recommendation is a 100% recommendation. We are and have been working with the Governor's office prior, Governor Perdue, in recommending elimination of the National Science Center. That is actually something that is a catch-up in that the National Science Center is in the process of moving much of their location to Washington. We continue to have access to, I suppose you'd call it a museum, but these are static displays that are on the Riverwalk in Augusta. We are sensitive to the fact that there was at one point some military tie-in terms of relationships, so we are continuing to monitor that. However, we have spoken with the folks from the National Science Center and informed them that it was our intention, the state's intention, to stop subsidizing those museum displays. We haven't gotten tremendous resistance, but again, it is, I do want to point out that it's a supplemental 11 change, and it's a big change. It's an elimination of our funding for the National Science Center. Programmatically, we don't see a lot of impact. We see fewer and fewer schools sending their children to the center for cost reasons. That was the primary thing that we were hoping to accomplish with our spend, was to allow students to go to the center at a subsidized rate. But fewer and fewer students have been going because, frankly, the schools don't have enough money to transport them to Augusta. In the non-QBE formula area, bottom line, it is slightly more than 4%, but I want to assure everybody that there are no indications, no one should read into that any suggestion that we're suggesting cutting this more than 4%. In fact, the special needs scholarships, both this year and next year, the reductions there are intended to true up, if you will, to what we anticipate the number of students to be. And by that I mean, for Senate Bill 10, or for the special needs scholarships, in the first year that a parent elects to send their student to the school, the funds, if you will, come from QBE. After that point, each year, they have to be put, the funds for those students, if they continue to be in the private school, have to be put into the budget. And that's what we believe this number reflects, that we're now up to cohort 3 and 4, meaning students that are no longer receiving money through QBE. Many of them, or some of them, are returning or moving or whatever the case may be. We know that the numbers are actually coming down. And so the changes here are reflective of what we anticipate to happen with Senate Bill 10, which is the cohorts will shrink a bit. And as they shrink, we don't need to be putting more money in. Now, of course, we will assure you that we never send out more money than actual. So in no event would we ever send more money than we actually have students to justify. But there's no sense in having the money sitting there if, in fact, we don't anticipate that many students. Nutrition is a 5.5% reduction, slightly more than the 4%. I should mention that last year's cut coming into this year was significant. It was over 23%. And so that will be, even though it's relatively small compared to the 4%, it's still going to be an area of concern for many of our schools, in that we did cut about a quarter of it coming into this year. Pupil transportation is a 4% reduction. Want to say absolutely for equalization, thank you to Governor Deal and I would hope the General Assembly. The equalization recommendation is for no reduction. Of course, as Superintendent Barge mentioned, QBE and equalization are primary funding formulas. Equalization is the formula that is intended to subsidize low wealth systems, particularly where the tax digest doesn't generate enough money with their millage rate. And so it is very positive news from our perspective that Governor Deal is not recommending a reduction in equalization. Moving then to QBE, which is the largest budget item. It is also the primary funding formula for the state. Again, we are very pleased, and this was very positive news for our school systems. Governor Deal is firstly recommending an increase in funding for growth. Of course, every year we come to you with a request for growth based on the number of students. This year the growth number was small. It was less than 0.6%, but nonetheless it was $82 million, and Governor Deal has recommended the funding. And Governor Deal has not recommended a decrease for austerity, and that is a very positive change. Superintendent Barge mentioned to you the difficulties that many of the systems are having, and I'll just echo that quickly anecdotally. As the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Education, I work with a lot of the school systems, and I can assure you, even though we don't have all of the specific numbers yet, we're working on that. Tax digests and tax digest revenues are down throughout the state. And of course, school systems primarily fund themselves through the tax digests. And so they are having a very difficult time in recouping the loss of tax digest. It is not an environment where school systems are looking to increase taxes. And so not having an additional reduction to QBE at a time when they are seeing significant, in some cases, very significant fall off in their millage rate, taxable income is very welcome news. I do want to mention, again, a very positive point. Governor Deal has recommended that we do fund House Bill 280. House Bill 280 was the change, you may remember, to allow beginning teachers in math and science to be paid off of the year 6, to be paid on year 6 of the salary schedule. That equates to just over $12.6 million this year. The REASE is a 4.6% elimination, a reduction for elimination. I do want to mention here programmatically that we did, in fact, request that the governor, and he has followed up on, targeting this reduction to the subprogram referred to as EdTech centers. Again, from our perspective, as we looked at the REASEs, we do feel the REASEs are important partners. We feel very strongly that we need the math mentors to continue the work that they're doing, and so we, the department, did recommend that we look at reducing the monies that were flowing through the REISs on behalf of the Ed Tech Center activities. Those Ed Tech Center activities have been picked up by the old Ed Tech Centers in many cases, and as a practical matter, looking at all of the sub-programs, that is the area that we thought would be the best to cut if we had to reduce. So that is actually a programmatic recommendation from the DOE. School improvement is a 6.5% reduction, slightly larger than the 4. We actually have not been hiring as many of the time-limited staff, and so that reduction is something that we will be able to accomplish without jeopardizing our good relationship with the federal government. Many of you know we have a SIG grant, which is about $120 million. And we've accomplished that through a good relationship with the feds. So this reduction should not impact our relationship with Washington as it relates to our commitment to school improvement with the remaining state funds. The state interagency transfers, I want to point out the $56 million increase that shows in there. First and foremost, this is a interagency transfer. So this actually, it's in our budget, but we don't actually see the money. It's put in on behalf of the state health benefits. And this is intended to be a true-up for non-certificated personnel. In this line item, the state supports funding for non-certificated, which means bus drivers and certain lunchroom workers. State health benefits increase the rate of state health benefits charge from about $162 to about $218 a year. And so this increase is reflective of the need to true up the number, if you will. Now, this number was not calculated by us. It's calculated by OPB and state health benefits, et cetera. But it's a large number, but I assure you the number itself is intended, it's mathematical, and it's intended to support the change in cost and be reflective of the change in cost for the non-certificated personnel. The school systems, by the way, pay in for other. This doesn't cover everyone. There are still employees locally who pay directly into state health benefits. These are those that are directly included in the formula. The state schools, zero recommendation for cut there. We're very appreciative of that. Those are the schools where we actually do have direct instruction for the Department of Education. Again, reflective of reductions that we've taken in past years, the fact that they do have growth, and that from our perspective, it would be a priority to not reduce them any further. And Mr. Chairman, if it's subject to your questions, or shall I go just to 12 supplemental? Or
yes, go on if you don't mind into the 12 and maybe pick up the pace just a little bit.
Yep.
And that way we can give question time at the end then.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Okay, for 12, not supplemental, actually 12, big budget beginning. I'm on page 1. I'll start with page 176 of the governor's report, governor's budget. So here, the general recommendation seems to be, this looks better, the general recommendation seems to be 8%. That is to say, most programs are looking at an 8% reduction in general. Fortunately and thankfully, not QBE equalization, and I'll walk through them, but that's, again, if you want to see what the common number is for us, the view that the governor seemed to have picked this for 2012 was the 8% view, 4% for 11 supplemental. Ag Ed is at 8%. That is twice what we have currently been withholding in this fiscal year, so we will continue to do some work and make preparations to determine what the programmatic impact will be. Agricultural education, as well as the technology career ed, does, from our perspective, have a lot of direct support and is an activity directly related to student training and teaching, and so we're going to be looking to make sure we can minimize the programmatic impact or discuss the programmatic impact of those reductions. The central office is at just over 8%. You do see there, point number 5, $706,000 of ARA funds moving off. And that, frankly, Those funds were intended to support Title I and ARA funds that came in. The staff were temporary, and that won't have any material impact on our operations. We were not able to use them to supplement what we were doing in the central office anyway. So those are direct activities related to ARA funds. The ARA fund activities are pretty much over, even though the audits of them will continue. So that's really a reflection of moving that out of the budget. The charter schools, again, as we did in 2011 supplemental, we are recommending elimination this time of the planning grants. Programmatically, we anticipate the same result, which is that because we already have a pipeline, a robust pipeline of charter applicants, and because we are improving the administrative application process, we don't feel that these are funds that would be we do feel that prioritization-wise, these are funds that could be eliminated with minimal programmatic impact. The facilities grants is an area where we are going to be more concerned, and we're going to have to look and review exactly which of our charter schools are using the funds, and we will sharpen up and have some programmatic descriptions of what we think the 8% will mean there. Curriculum development, again, it's the same Galileo contract for 2012. We are going to be continuing with math and ELA. We're also going to have a need to include science as science becomes part of the core curriculum and the science work that we're going to be doing. And so we'll be bringing the budget committees some additional information and analysis on exactly how this funding will move to support science as well. The virtual school, 4%. It is not our intention to reduce slots. As I said, for this year, we had agreed to an additional 1,700 slots. For next year, even with a 4% reduction, we will not look to reduce any slots, which means we'll be looking to adjust the teacher salaries. If necessary slightly, we'll also adjust any administrative activities that we can to make sure that we continue to have a very efficient system with, by the way, very good results without reducing the number of slots for students. GYSTC, this is a total elimination. I think that this is going to be probably something that we're going to discuss, as like with the RISAs, this is a partner of ours. GYSTC, this entity actually works closely with Kennesaw. Many of you will remember they actually sort of blended the operations, if you will, which brought some cost savings from the K-12 budget. So we will be looking to partner with them and continue to partner with them because they do have such a good network and because of that Kennesaw tie-in when it comes to teacher training and evaluation. So we'll be looking at contracts or ways to manage that activity. The Governor's Honors Program is a 10% reduction. I want to say that we have set up the foundation, and the intent of that foundation was to collect donations that would be specifically earmarked for operations of Governor's Honors Program. We're now sending out notices to the network of folks that have gone to Governor's Honors. We do believe that we will accomplish the funding necessary to replace this 10%. Again, it's not the intent of this 10% to reduce any of the time or any of the structures that we have in place. We had already gone from 6 weeks down to 4. We're not suggesting we would go lower than that. So we are looking to the foundation. We will be looking for donations to accomplish maintaining that same level of education. This is a very, very good program. It's also very popular, and we've had a lot of people say they support it, and so we're hoping we can get them to put $10, $15, $100 to to the foundation. Sorry, I'll do that later. The National Science Center, again, of course, the recommendation in 11 supplemental was to eliminate it, and so it would be eliminated here as well. The non-QBE formula, again, same. The RTCs is one difference where there is a recommended reduction that is not for the residential treatment facilities. There are two sources of funding. One is, first and foremost, is QBE. The RTC students do generate QBE funds. What we're referring to in the non-QBE formula grants area is supplemental funding that goes to these centers. We've talked many times about what the appropriate number is, and frankly, it's hard to know. There are different calculations of what the true supplemental number would be, so it's really at best a generalization. And so this reduction is one that we think is appropriate. If we do in fact have an RTC or RTF facility, now they're called, that had a particular need, we would look to manage it within our budget, or if, depending on what time of year it is, we might come back for an enhancement. But at this point, we don't have any particular expenditure that we can say would cause us to want to maintain a certain level. It is what it is at this point. Nutrition at 9.8%. Again, we've had a large reduction coming into this year. Same comment in that it is a proprietary model. School systems are able to raise the fees. They've done some of that. We're not suggesting that's the panacea, but it is one of the few places in the budget where the school systems are able to generate some funding to offset some of the reductions. Now, of course, I should also mention that the state budgeted funds are a very small portion of the overall spend for this activity. It's about 4% of the overall budget. The largest portion of funding for the school nutrition program comes from the federal government, and then the second after that would be the actual collections or receipts from the students. So this state funding is relatively small in comparison to the total spend for school nutrition. The federal funding for school nutrition has been increased slightly by a couple pennies per meal. That's a reimbursement basis per meal, about 1%. But the point being, all in all, this is a relatively small part of the overall pie of what they spend, no pun intended. The RESAs, again, if you look at the sub-programs in the RESAs, what we call the core services, that would be what you all are familiar with when you think back to what the RESA provides. It's a network it's a good network that we also use. We supplement this in some regards with federal funding. That's the $2.5 million that you see. So we do use the RESA network. This core activity is being reduced by about 10%. The Ed Tech Center reduction, as you see, $1.5 million. That is a specific programmatic targeted reduction request from the State Board. Same comment as it relates to prioritization. We would rather we eliminate the Ed Tech Center funding and try and support, firstly, the math mentors, but also the core activities of the RESA. School improvement, 10.6% reduction. Again, we will manage that. School nurses is a 10% reduction. We've not reduced school nurses as much as, say, school nutrition in past years. So. SED is a 1% reduction, and that is consistent with what we're going to be seeing with QBE. SED is actually a formula basis, if you will. It's the special ed equivalent to QBE in many respects, and so it's very favorable that it's at 1%, and should be. It's consistent with QBE. State schools, reduction of 1%, again, is consistent with QBE, SED, et cetera. It is actual students, and that's the theme, is where we're touching students directly. The governor wanted to minimize the reductions. The testing line, both this year and last, I didn't mention, the recommendation is for 0% change. That is really a reflection, as many of you will remember, the work that was done in looking at testing. We've already eliminated first and second grade CRCT. We did a lot of work in terms of bringing to the General Assembly proposals or ideas of what could be done. But frankly, much of the testing we do is either state and federal combined or state. And so that's a way of saying until we identify what it is we want to change in terms of the testing regime, it's really not practical to say we can reduce money or funding. We particularly couldn't accomplish any of that for this fiscal year. For next fiscal year, if we did want to make changes, we would have to make them quickly because of the contractual obligations. So subject to your questions, that's the presentation for now, and thank you all for your attention.
Okay, Scott, thank you for that. And we do have a couple questions that have teed up so far. And Representative Amerson. I have you as the first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions. During the governor's speech, he talked about changes from the amended budget, but as I look through these numbers, most of them are really changes from the current 2011 budget. How did I'm wondering what the difference is. Did you really educate him on what the 2011 amended budget would be?
Well, I would defer to OPB or someone to answer that particular question, although I will say from our perspective as the agency, Governor Perdue had instructed us to reduce what was the beginning budget by 4%, and there were different avenues of reducing it, and the funds that were allowed to be drawn out of the Treasury were reduced commensurately. And so from our perspective, we really didn't have the beginning year budget available to us. We've always had a reduced budget. I don't know if that helps you, but I think I could get OPB to give you a call, if I may.
Yeah, do you really think you're going to get $200,000 from the National Science Center and Foundation in the remainder of this year?
Yes, sir. We've actually not initiated the contract. That was part of the planning. There are areas where we have the State Board agreed that would be a change. We had spoken with the governor and working to the 4%, and that was one of the examples of a contract where we have not initiated. Galileo would be another example, because if we are in fact going to accomplish an elimination, we can't enter into the contract at all.
Okay. The last question, thank you, is over on page 112 of the supplemental budget, of the amended budget. And that question had to do with the bottom line. As you notice in the page 108, I believe it was, shows $81 million, and I suppose that these numbers came in so that you could subtract out the $14.5 million and get back to that point.
Yes, Representative Amison, I'm sorry, page 112 doesn't have any of that, but I think what you're referring to is the QBE adjustment.
Yeah, the recommended the education program adjustment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. You are correct. It is page 112. There's no number that says yes. So for anybody, it's the very bottom. Yes.
And so
the $14.5 million reduction that you see there as a yes is reflective of the fact that at the end of last fiscal year, Governor Perdue pulled that amount out of the 2011 budget and put it into 2010. The allotment sheets that we have sent out are reflective of that, which is a way of saying while the budget itself theoretically had $14.5 million in it of ARA funds, the school systems were not allotted that amount in the allotment sheets that we sent out. So from a management perspective, a financial management perspective, the school systems have not been planning on spending this $4.5 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question here on the information technology services. I know you mentioned furnishing internet services to all the school system. I assume that includes all the new charter schools as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The contract includes would include charter schools.
Okay. Can you pull that mic closer to you? I can't hear you. But
yes, sir. It would include charter schools. It also includes our state schools. They qualify.
Okay. Next question. How long has this contract been in place? How long?
Longer than 8 years. I could get you the historical number, but it has been in place for some years.
As far as the Department of Education, you're not part of the GATE program, isn't that correct? As far as the Georgia Technology Authority?
That's correct. We're not officially. I know we are in discussion with them, or they keep us aware of what they're doing, but
so the
not in our budget.
Okay, the AT&T contract continues on, and you draw down Fed funds. I heard you say 3 times more Fed funds than we offer state funds. Isn't that what I heard you say?
Yes, that's correct. The school systems actually submit the requests up to through AT&T, the universal communications.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a federal entity, and so the school systems actually draw the money directly. It doesn't come through our budget, but it is a match, and
Okay.
we pay 1/4 of the cost.
Is this negotiated on an annual basis or semi-annual basis, or how y'all do it?
It is typically negotiated on a 5-year basis.
5-year
We work
basis.
with the Department of Administrative Services, and so we do a 5-year contract at a time, which is what I was referring to in saying we wouldn't want to completely renegotiate a contract because we have a pretty good deal, and it was worked into that five-year arrangement.
When does it come up for renewal again?
I will have to find out. I think we still have 2 years. We probably still have 2 years left, but I will get you that answer.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more?
Yes.
On school nurses, the cut of over $1 million, does this mean we're going to have to let nurses go throughout the systems in the state?
The school nursing program has, in many respects, been underfunded if one were to think that these funds actually were paying for all of the nurses out there in the field. The reality is it used to be $30 million. It's now down to $20 million. There may be schools that will have to eliminate a full nurse. Many of our schools are actually do not have a registered nurse in all of the buildings. Many of the schools have had to come up with models. There is a requirement for having registered nursing staff on call. What this will probably mean is that school systems will have to continue to figure out ways to make sure that they have registered nurses who can contact the building representatives who are responsible for the health care of the students. It is clearly an area of concern when the swine flu was coming and with all the asthma medication, et cetera. But again, as a practical matter, it's becoming like transportation, where what we're sending down is a relatively small portion of what they're having to spend. Local school systems are having to subsidize it heavily, and whenever they're subsidizing it heavily, it means we don't quite have as much information in terms of how they're accomplishing the process.
One further question, if I may. School nursing, does it require an RN, or can it be an LPN or a PRN? CNA.
I will have to review that. I do know there was a requirement for an RN, access to an RN, but I also know that it doesn't have to be an RN in each building.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was interested on 177, the development or the cuts in the virtual school, both virtual school and curriculum development. I recently visited the Georgia Public Television and was interested to learn that about 77,000 of our teachers were going to GPTV for content, and seemed like an important way to provide in-depth content to our students. And I guess my question is, what is your relationship with GPTV, and how available are their wonderful resources for content working with the Department of Education? I guess the relationship is a little confusing to me.
Yes, ma'am. We have a very good relationship with GPTV. We, again, in moving toward that technology-based redelivery, we have looked to GPTV for support in a lot of our training. You won't see them in the top-line budget numbers here. They would be reflected in the contracts that we would execute with GPTV, and that's where you would see them. We do contract with them. We have various programs. The contract levels have changed as the activities have changed, but essentially we've been looking to use the GPTV, particularly as we're doing the curriculum rollout, to tape portions of it for redelivery. We get the best practices and the master teachers coming in, and we have them model the instruction, and we have found that when we try and do it ourselves, it just doesn't work that well. So their studios are available to us at a decent rate, and we have, I would say, a good relationship with them.
It just seemed like they would be a wonderful resource for teachers.
Yes, it is.
Representative Davis, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is on the supplemental. I'm here, Scott. Thank you. On the supplemental budget, the federal programs money, we're adding $321 million but then we turn around and we cut the stimulus funds in the 12 budget. I'm wondering why we're putting that money in the amended budget and not holding it over to the 12 budget. And I guess I got a two-tier question. The other question is if we're cutting $600 million out of the federal programs budget, are we eliminating federal programs? And what programs are we eliminating?
Yes, Representative Davis. Let me start with you really asked two questions. So the first question related to the $320 million. That is specifically referred to as the the Education Jobs Recovery Act. That money came down to Georgia and all states in September. It was intended to be primarily to bolster school systems, local school systems, so they wouldn't have to lay off teachers. The reality in Georgia is that most of our schools had already started, and the contracts had already been entered into in the previous May. So as a practical matter, it was very difficult for our school systems who had not known prior to September with any certainty whether they would be receiving the funds. It was hard for them to say, well, we're not going to lay off teachers because we know this federal money is coming in. What we did in Georgia, working with the feds, was allow the school systems to draw down the funds. The funds were distributed through QBE. That's the formula for the allocation. That's how they were sent out. The school systems were then able to pay down the majority of their, we instructed them to pay down payroll with 2.5 months. So they essentially targeted those federal funds toward payroll expenses, legitimate payroll expenses. That freed up the reporting requirement, if you will, for having those funds available in the state's budget. So the funds came down. That's where you're seeing them come in. We sent them out through the QBE formula. The school systems receive them. They have to be taken back out next year so that it doesn't show up as if we were going to be receiving another $320 million. We're not. It was a one-time shot. And so they came in. We distributed them out. And, of course, then we have to reflect in the budget for next year that these funds are no longer available. Otherwise, on a continuation basis, we would be double counting. As a material matter, though, if I may, the $320 million that we did send out, because so many of our schools had already made decisions about hiring, they were able, in some cases, to improve their programs, to hire a few teachers. You know, oftentimes in October, you have a few kids showing up that you didn't expect. Some of our school systems were able to save some of the jobs. But by and large, what we ask school systems to do and what school systems have been doing is allowing those funds that were freed up by using federal funds during the year to go into the reserve, the fund reserve, which we hope will help the school systems in meeting the challenges for fiscal year 2012.
And do we know if they're doing that? Or, I mean, obviously we talked earlier about their reduction in their local tax bases and tax digest. Are we aware of any of the local systems actually doing that?
Yes, most of the local systems are doing that, and all of the local systems are doing it in some fashion. The reason we don't have perfect numbers on it is because from a federal reporting perspective, what we had to report back to the feds was directly how they spent it. They brought it down. They paid out payroll. That allowed us to close the loop, if you will, with the auditors and say that's how they spent the federal monies. That freed up a like amount of local money, and that became then part of the general fund. And so now we have to say, well, how, what part of their general fund was this freed up resource, et cetera, et cetera. There was no requirement to track local funds. Where we will be able to see it is how the fund balances, what the fund balances will be at the end of this fiscal year. But I can assure you that all of the school systems were told, and all of them certainly understood the possibility of 2012 being a very challenging year, particularly as we see federal funds going away. A similar comment for 2012 would be the Representative Amerson, the federal funds that will no longer be available for next year's QBE, $140-some million.
Thank you.
We've got time for about 2 more questions, and I've got Representative Peake. He waves. Representative Chokas. You may want to use Representative Yates' microphone because you're not.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got just 2 questions. One is rather specific, and it deals with the virtual schools. What are the total number of slots that the state of Georgia allocates for, or that y'all allocate for?
I'll get you the exact number, but it's just under 9,000 would be the state-funded slots.
Gotcha.
And of course, the state-funded slots are those slots which are reflected here in this particular budget. The virtual school has additional courses which are offered on a pay-as-you-go basis, if you will. We will fund up to several courses, but they have to be the main courses within the 6 segment portions of the day. There may be students who, for whatever reason, school systems want their students to take extra courses. They can do that, but if they do take the extra courses, the school systems have to pay for that on their own. Similarly, if any private schools were doing that or any summer school remediation, those are on a more of a proprietary basis. So the total number of slots is just under 9,000. I'll get you the exact amount because we did commit to adding the, and I think I have it in there, but I'll get it for you. We did commit to adding the 1,700 slots. And we are committed to maintaining that baseline at just under 9,000 into next fiscal year as well, even with 4% reduction.
Great. Thank you. My next question may be a little bit more of a challenge, and I'd like to find out from the superintendent his feelings on the 4-day school week that several of our public schools have started into and the impact it may have on our students at some later date.
Well, I think it's certainly challenging for them as we continue to see achievement rates, requirements go up, what we call AMOs, annual measurable objectives. As we continue to see those rise for measuring adequate yearly progress, I think it will be a challenge for those systems to continue to meet those rising standards with less time. I think it's unfortunate that they're in this situation financially, that they see that as a necessity. But we will monitor those. We are committed to monitoring student achievement data in those systems to see how they fare. And I think that we've got a few months before that data starts rolling in from CRCT and Georgia High School graduation tests to see what kind of impact that it had. But we will be monitoring that.
I think that maybe not all the data will be reflected in their scores on tests, but also how it affects the communities that they live in. Thank you.
Right.
Well, thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Scott. We will certainly be seeing Scott back over some more as Chairman Dixon gets ready to start his hearings along with Chairman Heath. So thank you very much. If we could get your attention, we're running very much on time. We don't want to mess up a pretty good record so far today. We do have the Chancellor with us this afternoon to bring a presentation on the Board of Regents and their budget requests. And at this time, Chancellor, welcome. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
It is now.
It is now. Oh, yes, it is. Thank you. Let me say Happy New Year to everyone. And, of course, as always, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this august body. As the chairman said, today I want to discuss the governor's recommendations for 2011 amended as well as for FY 2012. Before I do that, however, I do have a number of the members of my board who have joined me here today, and I would like to recognize them. Our chairman, Willis Potts, is here, as well as Regent Ben Tarbutton, Regent Dr. Tommy Hopkins, Regent Jim Jolly, and one of your former colleagues, Regent Larry Walker, as well as Regent Dink Neesmith. I don't know where you are. Would you please stand or back over here? Thank you very much for joining me. We like to say these are some of the hardest working people in show business, and I certainly do appreciate their support here. We have a number of our presidents here in the audience today. I'm not going to run through the names because I know I would forget one or two, but if one of the presidents, will you just raise your hand, please? Come on, bud. I see you there. And Mark, and thank you for joining me as well. As many of you are aware, this is going to be my last budget presentation before I retire this June, and as I am fond of saying, I'm now on that glide path between who's who to who's he to who cares. But let me assure you that I do care. I do care deeply, very deeply about this state and certainly its system of higher education. It is a great system, and while many of you, of course, are familiar with it, we do have a number of new legislators and a number of new members of the committee. So if you would indulge me, albeit briefly, I'm going to talk just a bit before I get into the numbers about not only what we are, what we do, but also the impact that we have on this state, but more importantly, the impact on the future of this state, the future of your children, and in fact, the future of your children's children. So let me move into that. If you were to pick adjectives to describe the university system, I think the operative adjectives would be big, complex. It's geographically dispersed with 35 degree granting institutions. And now that I am leaving, I can also admit that it's extremely challenging to manage effectively. We have, as you can see here, 35 degree granting institutions across this state. And one point I want to stress is they are not homogeneous. All of them have unique and very distinct missions, and they touch the lives of all Georgians in one way or another. And ultimately, that's what the system is about. It is about transforming lives and strengthening the state of Georgia, not only intellectually, but culturally and certainly economically as well. What we do in many ways is simple. We create a more educated Georgia through our three-part mission of teaching, research, and service. Presently, we have over 311,000 students. 311,000 students is a population greater than 155 of Georgia's 159 counties. That is the size of our student population. Last year, we granted 54,000 degrees and certificates throughout the university system. And really, this is the magic of transforming lives, of helping people realize their full potential and helping them to become productive citizens of this state. Our research is critical. This is where we create knowledge, where we move the boundaries of knowledge, and where we transform often that knowledge from theory to practical applications. Our strong research efforts also attract the interest and also investment of companies worldwide and advance the economic development of this state. Thanks to the fine work of our researchers and the reputations of our institutions, the university system annually attracts in excess of $800 million in sponsored research from the outside. And research, of course, is not all abstract. Much of it translates into the many service activities that we perform on behalf of the citizens of this state, on behalf of businesses, on behalf of local governments. We touch the lives of every citizen in this state, whether we educate your children, whether we provide technology for your workplaces, whether we provide leadership for your communities. We directly served over 1 million citizens last year, whether they were farmers, small businessmen, or women, local economic development agencies, public health, or through our continuing education programs. The economic impact of our 35 institutions in FY10 was $12.7 billion on the state. And that is the reason why the engines of this system must be continuously and adequately funded if we are to continue to have that type of impact as we go forward. Let's when people talk about education, it's often they talk about it in terms of how it helps an individual, and it does. If you look at the next graphic, it's clear this is sort of old news to most of you here. The more you learn, of course, the more you earn. And conversely, the less you earn, the higher the chances are that you will be unemployed. The unemployment rate among people with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees and higher is not 10%. It is much lower than that. Also from this chart, you can see that someone with a bachelor's degree will on average make about $70,200 a year, which is $41,000 more than a high school dropout. Over the course of one's working life, a college graduate can expect to earn $1 million more than someone without a college degree. And if these college graduates are like most Americans, they will spend $1 million more as well, most of it locally. It's so, again, as we talk about how do we stimulate the economy, one of the answers is very simple. You create more college graduates. But one point we want to continue to make is that education is not just an individual benefit. It benefits all. How does it pay off for the state directly? The more you earn, the more you pay in taxes. Note that someone with a bachelor's degree can expect to pay on average almost $9,000 in state and local taxes, which is about $5,000 more than a high school graduate. And so, as I noted last year, again, if you wish to stimulate the economy, if you're looking for enhanced revenue, the surest way to achieve this is through education, through turning out more and more university graduates, to make the investments to turn out those graduates. So let's take a look at the state's investments in terms of the governor's FY11 and FY12 budgets. Let me put this in a little context. As most of you know, our budgets are formula driven, and the primary driver of that formula is the student enrollments and the credit hours that they generate. And I want to share with you three what I think are very important pieces of good news for the state. As you can see from this graph, we have a lot more students going to school. We are experiencing record enrollments in the university system. Our enrollment has increased by over 100,000 people in the last 10 years. This is good news for the state, particularly in light of the positive economic effects that I demonstrated earlier. The second piece of good news is that students are actually moving through the system faster than they were a few years ago. The number of credit hours that they are taking continues to rise on average, and that is putting them on a track to graduate in a more timely manner, and our graduation rates are going up. And the third piece, that is the third piece of good news. The graduation rate is on the increase. We're making a conscious and concerted effort in this area. In FY10, our system-wide graduation rate was 59%. It was up from 56.7 the year before, and we continue to work to make this even higher. So the good news is even more extraordinary given the difficult budget times we've been through over the last few years. And it is the direct result of the outstanding and hard work done by the people at the institutional level, our board, our presidents, and certainly the faculty and staff of this system. And we all owe them a debt of gratitude. So let me turn to this year. If we go to the FY 2011 amended budget, we started this year with about $1.92 billion in state appropriations. The governor has recommended a reduction of $112 million for the current year. This is almost a 6% reduction from the university system. We have had plans in place since the beginning of the year for 4%, 6%, and 8% reductions. We really had been operating at a 4% level in anticipation of this, and so we will implement our higher level reduction plans, and we will make the 6% reduction by the end of this fiscal year. But let me turn to next year, which I would describe as both difficult and challenging. It reflects the seriousness of the state's budget situation. We understand that funds are limited. We understand that the formula is not recommended for increase. We sought an increase of $177 million. This was to support the 19,000 additional students who enrolled in our system in 2010. So this is not a projection. These are mouths to feed, feet on the ground. And so we have the 19,000 additional students, and we ask for the funding. The funding is simply not there. In fact, we are taking an additional reduction of $185 million to our base budget, and this represents an almost 10% reduction. Which includes, of course, the continuing reduction of 6% from last year. Let me provide a historical context for our funding to make it something very clear, and that is that the university system has, in fact, participated in budget reductions of the last 3 years. If you go back to FY 2009, before the economic downturn, our budget, our state appropriation was $2.3 billion at that point in time. So over a 3-year period, we will have gone from $2.3 billion to $1.74 billion. Now, at the same time as that reduction, and we have managed that downward pressure on our budgets, we have also experienced explosive growth. Over that same period, we have seen student enrollment growth of 37,000 students. So if you look from FY9 to projected FY12, what you're seeing is that we are essentially funding a university larger than the University of Georgia with 25% less funding than we had. And so more students cost more money to educate, but more importantly, it costs more to educate them at the level of excellence and quality while preserving access at the same time. The combination of more students and fewer dollars has really resulted in a precipitous decline in support per student. If you look on the next page, this reflects the lower state funding per full-time student. Again, if you start at FY 2009 and come to FY 12 budget, we've gone from a high of $8,200 per student to what is projected to be $5,507 per student, which is a 33% drop in support per student. We are managing and will manage through this. We will manage through increased efficiencies, productivity, innovation, and unfortunately increased tuition and fee support from our students. Our focus has been and continues to be on our students. We continue to work to maintain our high academic quality, but we also want to, as every state system should, focus on maintaining access to higher education for all Georgians. We are very proud of our system. It is a world-class university system. We join certainly with the governor and all members of this body in the belief that we have to do all that we need to do in FY12 to keep our house in order. But we need to recognize that if we are going to have better financial days ahead, we must continue to make the required investments in higher education. Moving now from the operating budget to the capital budget. Again, this is a recap of the monies that you have authorized us to invest over the years. As you can see from this chart, the system has benefited from your continued investment in new facilities. We now run over half of the buildings in this state. The support, as you see for FY12, also reflects the continued harsh realities of the bonding situation. For FY12, the governor has recommended $81 million for the following projects, and here is a breakdown of the 81. $50 million of that is going to maintain and repair what we have. This is critical to the ongoing stewardship of more than 3,000 buildings. We, of course, as I noted earlier, own over half of the state's building inventory, and the funding is going to help every institution across the state. The other is, as you can see here, there's $1 million of new equipment for the newly constructed science academic buildings at Atlanta Metropolitan College. It does us no good to build buildings and not put equipment in them. The governor also has recommended $24.7 million for construction of 3 projects, $3.2 million for the continuing renovation of 2 academic buildings at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, $16.5 million for the nursing building in West Georgia, and $5 million for the health sciences building at Valdosta. Again, you see the focus on health and allied health facilities, consistent with the focus that we have put in this area over the last 5 years. The recommendation also includes $4.2 million for an Echo Commons project at Georgia Tech. This is an infrastructure improvement projected. Again, it's related to water conservation. We're committed to being part of the solution to the water usage problem, and again, not part of the problem. And this Echo Commons project is essentially a recapture and recycling project, which will tremendously minimize the use of external water resources by Georgia Tech. Last but not least is a recommendation of $1.2 million for the library in Twiggs County. One would wonder why this library, and again, this has to be rebuilt because, unfortunately, of a fire. And this all adds up to $81.1 million in bonds for the university system. Now, I've talked about the operating and the capital budget, which certainly reflect our current reality, but let me try and sum up what this means for the university system. As I said, this year is going to be the most challenging yet for the university system in the last 5 years, and in reality for all of state government. Despite the state's budget picture, students are coming to the university system in record numbers. However, for the first time, budget constraints do not permit funding for our enrollment growth. In addition, we've been asked to make reductions of another 10% and certainly constraints on our capital projects as well. Our priorities within this budget will be to protect our students, to preserve academic quality, and again, to maintain access. Our presidents are setting an excellent example of leadership that really has inspired our faculty and staff to do what has to be done in these economic times. They have made difficult decisions over the last 3 years. They will continue to make those difficult decisions, and we will continue to use every tool that we have available to serve our students. However, we do this sharing in your belief and in the governor's belief that this is the beginning of the end of our difficulties. We will do what we need to do in FY12 to help get the state on a solid financial footing. But as things do improve, I have to emphasize the importance of funding our formula growth. As I noted, we will have 37,000 students who are unfunded at this point in time, and we're dealing with that through productivity, efficiencies, and revenue enhancements. This funding formula. This is the historic investment that this state has made, and it has paid tremendous dividends for the state. It is the investment that is needed to preserve the future of this system and in reality, the economic future of this state. The university system's growing enrollment cannot be sustained without full formula funding over time. We cannot sustain growth without resources. The long-term support of academic quality and broad access requires a stability of resources. We are going to certainly rely on our now rather robust experience in managing tight budgets over the last 3 years and the effective work that our institutional presidents will do. This is not a panic moment for us. We've learned a lot over the last 3 years. We have a number of tools to help us manage, whether it's ongoing efficiency measures, our economies of scale that we're trying to harvest, tuition fees, tuition carry forward, fundraising, private giving, and research grants. And we'll continue to employ all of these tools and others. But again, I stress, we cannot maintain both quality and access without funding. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my formal remarks. However, before we get to your questions, since this is my last time, I'd like to take just a brief moment to share some thoughts with you and this body as in my last presentation. I came to this job 5 years ago next month after a very long career in the business world. I really wasn't looking for another job. I was looking for a public service opportunity. And I was attracted to this opportunity and impressed by this state's commitment to one of the abiding passions of my life, and that is higher education. Over the past 5 years, I've had the opportunity to work with many of you here. I've enjoyed it thoroughly as we've tried to work through some of the most challenging economic times in this state's financial history. We have a strong university system, and I've been honored to represent our students, our faculty, and our staff, and I've been honored to be given the responsibility to safeguard the investments that you have made in this system. As I prepare to leave, I urge all of you to continue to support and fund in good times and bad times education, all of education, whether it's K through 12, whether it's the technical college system or the university system. As the governor said in his State of the State, I also believe that we need to work as hard as we can to preserve hope in some form for future generations to come. I will end today, as I began, by stating that education matters, because it is through education that we create economic opportunity, that we transform the lives of individuals, and that we guarantee a prosperous future for all of Georgia's citizens. We cannot preserve our future by eating the seed corn today. This system, in order to remain strong, in order to maintain its quality, to remain viable over time, must be funded robustly. Among your many priorities, this must be a challenge met. Again, thank you for your time today, and more importantly, thank you for the opportunity to serve this state and this great system over the last 5 years, and I will now be pleased to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor. We do have a few questions for you. Senator Hooks.
Thank you very much, Chancellor, for your service. Regent Walker and I have been down here on 5 different chancellors, and we've enjoyed working with all of them. Continue to.
Thank you, sir.
I do not understand the large increase in your budget in workers' compensation. It's on page 321, item 1 at the bottom. It reflects an adjustment in workers' compensation premium of almost $500,000. The workers' comp, of course, is based on risk and payroll. Now, if you turn over here to risk and payroll in the Forestry Commission, they've got a cut. Theirs is a high-risk business, but yet yours, I wouldn't think, was very high risk, or the payroll has gone up. But why would you show 401, 408 in increase in workers' comp premiums.
Well, it's always bad to start with the first question by saying I'm going to have to get back to you on that one, because I do not have an answer for that question, but we'll certainly get you one. Yeah.
Representative Lucas.
Mr. Chancellor, over here.
Yes, sir.
Since you talked about the regions being cut and having to go with the 6% plan, what do students look forward to as far as an increase in tuition? How much of an increase in tuition are we going to have?
That, again, is a question that I cannot answer, because the process is that the board will take the governor's budget and then as it is passed by this body and signed, and then make an assessment of how much revenue we have and how much we're going to need. I would tell you that if we were to raise tuition only, if we were to do nothing else but raise tuition to offset the absence of the formula and the reduction, it would be about 30%. That's not going to happen. We will not let that happen, and one reason it will not happen is because that would severely impact access to our institutions. And so the board, in its wisdom, will make some balance between access and the funds we need to run our institution. If I were a betting person and I were to ask, would I expect there to be a tuition increase, I would say yes to that.
All right. The other question I would have, then, if these particular scenarios are having to work out with a reduction in tuition, how did the regents arrive at the decision to start an engineering school at the University of Georgia?
Let me put this in context. We do not fund new programs at the system level. If we were to fund new programs, we would be inundated with requests on an ongoing basis for new programs. So any program that starts at the campus level has to be done out of reallocation of institutional funds. And so we give the presidents a lump sum, and then they are charged with making wise decisions and allocating that. Programs are approved at the system level. The engineering programs this year are expected to cost approximately $3 to $4 million out of a $1.1 billion budget at the University of Georgia. And again, even I, with my feeble financial skills, could probably carve $3 to $4 million out of a $1 billion plus budget. Now, that certainly will grow over time, but enrollment will grow. If I don't know exactly where it's going to be carved out of or what programs will be impacted, those are decisions that we leave to the presidents. But again, also in context, the University of Georgia already has 5 engineering programs. They have ag engineering, they have biochemical engineering, they have biological engineering, they have computer system engineering, and they have environmental engineering already. And so we're not talking about starting an engineering culture at the University of Georgia, nor starting facilities from scratch. There are facilities there. There are tens, if not hundreds, of professors that have engineering and science in their pedigrees. And so we're talking about adding 3 programs to the 5 that are already there.
The last question would be, Mr. Chancellor, after explaining that and telling us that the presidents will make a decision on cutting the money to start the program within their budget, why is it, during the 37 years I've been here, that HBCUs are part of the university system but seem to be excluded. And when I say that, why is it that they don't have a veterinary school of medicine at Fort Valley State? Why is it that they don't have a law school down at Albany State? Why is it that they don't have the teacher education program at Savannah State, as well as the Marine Extension, since it sits right on the coast?
Let me, if I might, go back to a statement I made earlier, which is all of our institutions have unique missions. We ask them to do specific things. We do not expect every institution to be a broad-based institution. That is the expectation that we have primarily of UGA in terms of the broadest array of offerings. With respect to some of the functions that you mentioned, particularly teacher education, we are in fact on path to reinstate teacher education at Savannah State. We're going through that evaluation process now. We do have periodic mission reviews at the regents. We have strategic planning sessions every year and look at who is teaching at what, and do we need to have more people teaching a specific discipline. And again, studies are done in terms of demand. And so the reason we have a system is we try to look at these things from a state perspective, not from an institutional perspective. I certainly don't want to cast disparaging comments on my colleagues, but my suspicion is that left to their own devices, every institution in our system would probably have a broader array of offerings than they have today. And one of the reasons we have a system is to try and manage that process.
Senator Williams. Chancellor, I believe you used the numbers of $8,200 down to $5,500 is what we're contributing to Regents on a per student basis.
Yes, sir.
Where does that rank us in the Southeast or nationally at current?
That's one of those. I'm so pleased you asked questions, because we actually have a slide on that one, and I guarantee you this was not a plant question either. This shows you the public four-year colleges and universities tuition, and this is an average. This has a one-year lag in it. As you can see, we're slightly in the bottom half. If you look at this same graph with tuition plus state support, it looks a little differently. We're closer to the bottom there. The yellow represents the state support, and if you were to draw a straight line up, you will see that the state support in Georgia, if we look in previous years, is not quite ahead of as many other states as it used to be. Certainly it is still ahead of a lot of states such as West Virginia and Tennessee, Virginia, Alabama, Oklahoma, and most certainly South Carolina. If you look at what's happening there, you can see that tuition is going through the roof as state support has gone down in South Carolina, and that's what will happen if state support continues to decline. As you can see, between North Carolina and South Carolina, the costs are almost identical, but the sharing between state and students is very different in North Carolina, which is making a much larger commitment to support education.
How many of the states that are above us offer Hope scholarships?
I would have to get you that. I don't know. Many of states have tried to emulate the Hope Scholarship in one form or another. Some states have need-based scholarships as well, but many of those have been cut back because of the financial time. So I am not sure of the answer to that, but we'll certainly get you something on that.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you. Chancellor?
Yes, sir.
You've spent quite a bit of time talking about the cuts and the budget cuts and the increased efficiencies and those types of things, I'd like to come back to partially what Representative Lucas asked you. If you can't tell us how much tuition has increased, can you address the percentage of fees that have gone up during this same time? As people around the state have made lots of sacrifices in their businesses, just like people within the university system has. I know I have two children that I'm very happy with the education that they're receiving in the Georgia university system, but as a parent, I can assure you the checks that I write each year have gone up substantially. So can you give us some more information, or when can we expect that information to find out what type of tuition increases, including fees, have gone up?
Yeah, let me make something clear. I can tell you how much tuition has gone up. I can't tell you how much it is going to go up. That's not a decision that is mine to make. Fees have gone up, and there was really a sort of a backlog on fees when fees were being paid for by Hope as well. That was a natural damper on fees. Once that was frozen, fees started to go up much more vigorously. And let me also stress that fees are approved by the students. And the board has worked very diligently to make sure that there is at least 50% student participation on fee committees, that there is a minimum number of students on these committees such that there are not one or two people making fee decisions. And so fees other than the system-wide fees of $150, $200, $150, and $100 are in fact driven by requests from the institutions. The fee levels are different at every institution, but I will give you the average of how much they have increased over time. They went up in 2009, 35%. In 2009. And a lot of this is driven by what we call public-private venture projects. We have a lot of new dormitories, new student health centers, new rec centers. Over the last 5 years, you have granted us approximately $1 billion in bonding authority. We have spent $2 billion in public-private venture projects, twice what we've gotten from the state. Those public-private venture projects are securitized by student fees and rents, and so you see that kind of explosion. They went up 26% in 2010. In FY11, the board put a moratorium on fee increases, and they went up 4.2% because of the special system-wide fees that we have added. And so fees have in fact gone up faster than tuition, but the board this year and going forward is taking a much harder look at fee increases in concert with tuition increases, because dollars are certainly fungible, and fee increases were outpacing our tuition increases.
Representative Rogers.
Mr. Chancellor, I too want to ditto what everybody said about your performance the last 5 years. My question to you is, I know in the past we've changed names of colleges, went through a branding program from junior colleges to state colleges and universities. But the Medical College of Georgia has been the Medical College of Georgia for, 100 years. And my question is, I know we have a new president, and I heard you just say we're in hard economic times, but we're rebranding the medical college. And I think I read where the branding was going to cost $2.9 million. I don't know if that's accurate or not. But that $2.9 million we could use through K through 12 to fund nurses. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, why do we have to do this now? Mm-hmm. I know it's going to be done February the 1st, but as a layman, can you give me an explanation?
Well, I can give you hopefully a lucid explanation. First, the name Medical College of Georgia was felt to be limiting and confusing as we took polls nationally, people thought it was just a medical school, not a nursing school, not a dental school, not an allied health school. And again, that is sort of the impetus behind the name change. The cost of it, you have it correct, is $2.9 million. That is spread out over multiple years. But I need to put that in context as well, because of the 2.1 of that is signage. And if it had not changed its name, we would still be spending about 2.1 over the next several years, because again, we've been working with the city in terms of confusing signage, of trying to make Augusta a destination and place, and making sure that people could get to the appropriate medical facilities. And so we had already planned on spending the $2.1 million in concert with the city on signage for whatever the name of the institution was going to be. And so if I were to say do not change the name of the institution, that really doesn't have that much of an impact on the 2.1. The other $800,000, as I said, will be phased in over a number of years, and that has to do with internal tagging, publications, and things of that nature. And again, these are decisions that are made at the institutional level out of the funds that we give presidents. We pay them to make appropriate judgments. And again, the president believes that this is an appropriate expenditure given the strategic plan of wanting to grow that university, wanting to make it a destination, a medical destination center. The population of Augusta is bigger than the population of Rochester, Minnesota. And so that's where the Mayo Clinic is. And so we want to try and create in Augusta a destination location which takes better signage than we have there now.
Senator Millard.
Chancellor over here. Oh, your SREB slide, make sure I understand I believe it's 12,041 under Georgia. Does that include Hope dollars? The 12,000, I believe it's 12,041?
Yes, the white portion, which shows the tuition paid, will contain Hope dollars. Approximately 29% of our students are on Hope. Approximately 56% of them lose it the first year. So on average, we have about 29% of the students.
Follow-up question that, and again, I did what everybody else says. We appreciate your service. You've been on the inside now for 5 years.
Yes, sir.
And we have been challenged by the governor to reform the Hope Scholarship Program. This is your chance, if you would. Any thoughts you have on what you would do waving the magic wand on your way out the door?
I appreciate that opportunity, but the wisdom and judgment of the public was not to elect me to make that decision. I have listened to some of the proposals that GSFC is making. Some are more palatable than others. Again, I think we certainly need to preserve hope in some form. I am given that the rate of tuition increase will be higher than the rate of the lottery increase if we in fact do not continue to have, if we have declining state support, then it seems to me almost inevitable that there will be a decoupling of the Hope amount from the tuition amount. You don't have to do that. You can make the restrictions so stringent to maintain that. But again, if the pool of students who receive Hope becomes so small, then its universality, which we certainly tout now, would not be the same. I don't have the answers, but again, I suspect that some decoupling of tuition and hope should be part of the solution.
Which I would say, you're saying maybe a flat dollar amount versus continuing as tuition rises, if I understand what you're saying.
Well, that's not exactly what I said, but we have differing tuition levels at differing universities, and so I believe that the formula should take that into account, even if it is a fixed amount. What someone would get at a research institution, for example, in order to have a similar impact would be different than someone getting it at an access institution.
Representative Ellis Black.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. In both the supplemental and the 12 budgets, you've got reductions in the extension service and experiment station. What percent are those reductions?
I believe the B budget items were 8%, 8% reduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to follow the tobacco settlement money, which all seems to be playing out in your budget. On page 9, the tobacco settlement money, which is from an outside source, has dropped from about 14 million. But in your budget, it is all being reduced on page 323, almost all, by $9.2 million by moving the Georgia Cancer Coalition to the economic development. And then on page 321, you're losing $750,000 of an eminent scholar from tobacco money. Can you educate me on why we're removing the tobacco settlement money from the research foundations of our universities and transferring it to economic development? And do you have an understanding of where the rest of the tobacco settlement money is going that is not in your budget?
We were not a part of the decision process to move the GRA or the Cancer Coalition to another part of the state government. I mean, these were pass-through monies anyway for us. They were not monies that we control. You certainly can make very lucid arguments about what is the proper home, but this is not a decision that we were involved in.
But a substantial part, a good part of the tobacco settlement money was going into eminent scholars that was multiplying itself significantly in terms of outside research money. So I'm at a loss to understand why we're losing that opportunity by transferring tobacco settlement money out of the research institutions.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, GRA was transferred, and a lot of our eminent scholars do work with GRA. Some do not, of course. But again, as I said, we were not a party to that decision.
Senator Say.
C. Thank you, Chancellor. We know what Clayton State has done for the Southern Crescent and for the metropolitan Atlanta area. And last year we did receive monies in the bond package so that we can do the design phase of the science building down at Clayton State University. We are right now in need of $19.8 million in the bond package for that science building to be shovel ready. So I didn't see anything yet. That's why I'm asking now. Are we, Clayton State University, included in that bond package?
No, you are not. There's $81 million, if you want to put that slide back up. We received $81 million worth of bonding, and out of the 81, actually 50 of that 81 is going to go to our major repair and renovation activity to maintain the buildings that we do have. And so as you can see on this graphic, this is where the rest of the 81 million goes. Now, if you're asking, is that sufficient capital for the university system, again, our answer probably is the same as every other agency, which is that we certainly need more. We certainly want more. This is what's in the budget. We will manage to this amount. This body, of course, ultimately makes those decisions. We do not.
Thank you.
Chancellor? Well. Oh. We have someone in the back. Representative Dollar?
Back row. Back row. Just for clarification, who determined the allocation for the bonding?
This is the governor's recommended budget. We submit a budget. The process is that we submit a budget which has what we believe is necessary to effectively run our system. That budget is taken and then by the governor's office put in the context of all other budgets, and that again the governor was elected to make the appropriate priority judgments, and these are the judgments that he has made.
I guess my question is, who made the recommendation? Did it come from your office? Did it come from the president's? Did it come from the board? I guess that's my question.
Our board approves both a capital and an operating budget. It approves the individual capital projects, which are part of our 6-year capital plan. And we submit that to the governor's office, and the governor puts those requests in the context of what he believes affordable, and we get a budget that comes out of that for the university system.
Thank you.
Senator Staten.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chancellor. Let me add my voice to the many that will echo throughout the state over the next several months, saying thank you for a job well done as our Chancellor. It's been great to work with you. If I could ask just a question, perhaps one follow-up. When we obviously are in a situation where we're not anticipating growth in the formula, how does that, or how would you expect that to specifically impact institutions within the system that are rapidly growing, like Georgia Gwinnett College or Kennesaw State University? Are there things that would mitigate that so that those institutions have the ability to continue with the phenomenal growth that they've been experiencing?
That's an excellent question. Our formula requests are based on averages to begin with. And so what happens in that averaging process is that institutions on the polar ends of the spectrum, both the no-growth institutions or the slow-growth institutions and the extremely high-growth institutions on the other end of the spectrum, tend not to be as well served by the formula as they would like to be. We are talking about a formula that has a 2-year lag in it. If you look at the student body of a place like Kennesaw or a place like Georgia Gwinnett 2 years ago versus what it is today, even if you get the formula, those types of institutions are under stress already. And so, again, they will be more stressed by the absence of the formula. But again, we have learned a lot over the last 3 years. We will manage through this, but the message I continue to want to emphasize is we cannot sustain rapid growth without resource support and provide you both the access you want for the people of this state and at the quality level that they've come to expect and you've come to expect from this system. It's just not sustainable.
If I could follow up, Mr. Chairman, just briefly. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but a year ago, my oldest son was applying to college, and I remember the guidance counselors telling us that we had the great misfortune of being at one of the years where there was just the very highest number of students graduating from high school in the United States and applying to college for the first time. I wonder if you have any research
or if there's any indication that the dramatic increases we've seen in enrollment growth, if that maybe will begin to change. Obviously, the economic situations have exacerbated it, perhaps made it even larger than it might have been. But do we anticipate any slowing in the enrollment growth that we've seen in recent years?
Well, the growth last year was certainly less than the year before. Pardon me. I believe we had something like, I know the year before we had about a 6% growth. I think we were down to about 3 or 4% last year. As we project out into the future, the data we have shows that Georgia will continue to have an increasing number of high school graduates for a number of reasons. Again, there is continues to be an in-migration on average over time to this state, and also some excellent work is going on to increase the high school graduation rate. As a system, we matriculate a much higher than average number of the high school graduates in this state go to our system than in a lot of other states. And as that number increases, we will, again, continue to have pressure on our system. And so we will have more high school graduates and a greater graduation rate. And so we will continue to have pressure on our system going forward.
Representative Chokas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chancellor, I want to thank you personally and Elaine for all y'all's work the last 5 years. It's been a big challenge, and we've invested our young with you, and we appreciate the quality of your work and the output that you've given us.
Thank you very much.
To follow up on Senator Staten's question, years ago we talked about the growth of the system going to about 400,000 students, and I think the date was set 2017. Has there been any changes in those projections?
Well, when I came in, I predicted that we would have 100,000 more students by the year 2020. And our growth was so rapid, I just kept making that same prediction every year, just ignoring the previous years. And so, again, as Arthur Burns said, the secret of good forecasting is to forecast often. And I continue to believe that we will have 100,000 more students than we have today. We will go to 400,000 students. I expect us to be, even with modest growth, over 320,000 by the fall of this year. And so we'll easily pick up, I think, 80,000 over the next decade. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chancellor, you mentioned the library that was being bonded to be built at in Twiggs County.
Yes, sir.
Did you say there was a fire there?
I was led to believe that
Was there an insurance settlement or anything? Or?
I do have, I am pleased to have with me the state librarian, Dr. Lamar Veach, and Dr. Veach is anxious to answer this question, which I am not, but...
Thank you. The library was actually struck by lightning, and it was certainly devastating to that community. They are using part of I believe there is some insurance, and they're using it as part of their local match under our formulas. So this would be a typical state, a joint local state project with local funds and state funds and a matching formula. So they're being handled in a typical manner, but they were put up through the recommended high on our recommended list simply because of the devastation of completely losing a library overnight.
Could I follow on that? Then what's the total cost of the project?
I'll have to get back to you.
We'll get back with you on that one.
I believe it's about $2 million.
Well, Chancellor, I started to say this a minute ago and jinxed it, but I think you've run the gamut of the questions now. So I echo all the sentiments that we appreciate your service to our state, and thank you for your service, and we just appreciate so much you spending this part of your life as you wind down things here with us, and all that you've done to help us.
Thank you, sir, and it's been a real pleasure and joy for me as well. Thank you very much.
We'll take about a 5-minute break for restrooms and to change out the next presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could come back to order, if the members would take your seats. We have Commissioner Ron Jackson of the Technical College System of Georgia with us this afternoon. And if you would, please take your seats so he can begin his presentation. Thank you, everybody. Commissioner, thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We look forward to hearing what you got to say and your requests or offerings of refunding of money.
The request is a tough word to use for this, but nevertheless, we understand the difficult condition of the state. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about how TCSG, the Technical College System of Georgia, works for students, it works for business in Georgia, and it works for the taxpayers in Georgia. And that's the way we're going to structure our comments today, and then I'll be glad to answer any questions. You can see the numbers. It's been a banner year for the technical college system since we met with you last year. We served 190,000 plus technical education students. 80,000 of those were enrolled in what we call our strategic industries. 31,000 graduated from one of our programs. In Quick Start, which is our banner economic development program where we provide free training for new or expanding businesses in Georgia, we trained 97,000 individuals in those training programs. Quick Start created 8,880 jobs. They saved, according to our records, 3,864 jobs that could have left Georgia were it not for the training that we provided for those companies in their expansions. And the students served in adult education, 91,704. And the GED diplomas, 19,000. We are responsible, as you know, for adult education and the GED program in the state. If you add those numbers up, we're approaching 300,000 students in the technical college system. How we work for students, if you'll look at our enrollment history, you can see serving 209,926 in technical education this past year. You can see our growth line as it has gone 30% over the past 7 years. The FTE has continued to climb. We had in FY10 over 4 million credit hours and over 100,000 students in one quarter, which is the highest level of students in a quarter that we've ever had. This is instructive. If you look at the chart, it shows you, and a little difficult to read here, but you have a handout. This is by age group. The red line is the one that was indicative of we believe, the economic downturn. That's the over 40 group of individuals. We served almost 19,000 students that were over 40 years of age. Our highest group is still under 21. That continues, but all age groups went up in enrollment. We entered into an agreement this year because of the economy with the Department of Labor, the Georgia Department of Labor, who used some U.S. Department of Labor funds to allow us to create a program in the Labor Department offices, the employment offices all over the state, I'm not going to play the video for you, but I would encourage you to go to tcsg.edu. That's our website. And at the top of that page, on the header, you'll see College That Works. Click on that. It will take you to a video that is running in loops in all the employment offices in Georgia that really is about what you do when you lose your job and in some cases lose your hope that individuals can find their passion and find jobs if they come back to the technical college system of Georgia. This has been a very successful effort on our part. There's pamphlets and brochures in all the Department of Labor offices, and we run those individual videos on our website, and it has made a difference for individuals coming back to college who have not really understood that there are opportunities at the technical college. So we're pretty pleased with that program, and I encourage you to go to our website and take a look at it. Our awards and graduates continue to increase. You can see that our total awards were 42,127 and our graduates were 31,424 this year. That's an all-time record. You may ask, what's the difference between a graduate and the awards? Some graduates graduate with more than one award. They get maybe a technical certificate and a diploma or an associate's degree at the same time. They will have done their coursework together, so we don't duplicate that, but we report them as awards and as graduates. Our job placement and retention rates, we've been watching this one very closely, and this data is just in for us for 2010. We've always been very proud of our placement rates. You will hear the colleges say that their placement rates are over 90%. What this data is, though, is a direct data match with the U.S. Department of Labor's data on individuals who are paid unemployment insurance matched against our student records and our student data. So we know that in 2009, for instance, 86% of our graduates, 6 months after they graduated from our college, had a job that somebody was paying them unemployment insurance. And we know how much they were being paid. We also know how much they were being paid when they came to the technical college. So that data is very rich data. What you will see here, which is not unexpected, but the 78% placement rate this year is directly related to the downturn in the economy and in the unemployment rate. 78% is still a good rate for individuals that have found a job after they graduated with us. It's not as good as we're used to, and it's not as good as we want. But the good news is 78% of those people, someone is paying unemployment insurance on them today. Now, I will say this to you. A number of students don't go to an organization that pays unemployment insurance. They may go to the local beauty salon and get a 1099 job where they're really not paying unemployment, or they go into their own business, or they go to another college to continue their education, and they're not considered in this number. This is just a direct retention and a job placement rate for our technical colleges. We're proud of that data. We're disappointed in the 78%, but given the economic conditions of the state, we still think that's a good bang for the buck. What does that mean for our students? Those that graduate and get a job, that means, according to the data that we ran with the Department of Labor Data Match, the average increase for pay for all graduates was $2,448 more than they made when they came to us. That's an average. But for those that were involved in strategic industries, those medical science programs, welding programs, some of the programs that are high-paying jobs and that are hiring, they made $9,100 plus more than they made when they came to us. We know that data is correct, and we think it's important. And for those 78% of students who got jobs, they're making more money than they made when they came to us. And we have data to show that. A disappointing situation is our high school dual enrollment programs. Dual enrollment is a great program for the state. Students that enroll and take dual credit during their high school years graduate at a 95% rate. We're down to 5,976 students this past year who were dually enrolled. Much of this is driven directly by the difficulties of budgets and the declining budgets in the local school systems, and not doing the double dipping that was an issue at one time, where the local school system earned their QBE dollars and we earned our funding formula dollars. And quite frankly, if you do that and you enrolled 50,000 students in dual enrollment programs, the cost of that would probably be prohibitive. So while we loved that funding formula where we both got the funding, and I think it's an investment that you can make a debate favorably for, because you get 95% of those students graduating, in this environment we know that would be most difficult to do. But it's important for you to understand, and for us to understand, the impact of not being able to fund dual enrollment in a way, given this budget environment, that makes it viable, particularly for local school systems. Some small, non-growing systems just find it very difficult to put students in a dual enrollment program when they lose dollars for it. I'll be happy to answer any questions about that, but I wanted you to have that number. Moving to the adult education program. This is a tough one because we get a set amount of money on an annual basis, both from the state and from the U.S. Department of Education, for our adult literacy, adult education program. It's a 52% federal and 48% state. So the amount of money we get reflects back up to the amount of money we get from the feds. So reductions do, in fact, affect the amount of dollars that we have for this program. You can see our GED graduates over the past 10 years. It's been relatively constant except for 2001, 2002. I explain this every year. In 2002, they implemented a new GED test. Everybody heard it was going to be really hard, so they went out and took the test in 2001 so they could beat the harder test. So we had an uptick in 2001. You can see it's been relatively constant since then. What I do want to report to you is that we are implementing an online computer test for GED. The GED test can be administered on the computer now. The results will be much quicker coming back. We think our number of GED graduates and GED testers will likely go up as a result of that. But you can see we've been relatively constant. The interesting thing here is that if you get your GED or your high school diploma, you get $7,563 more in your annual salaries than you would get if you didn't have a GED. $1.5 billion in increased earnings potential for that 205,000 graduates we've had over the last 10 years. That's a $1.5 billion annual impact on our economy. $93 million in taxes come from those individuals who get a high school or a GED diploma. That's an important point to make for the investment that we make in adult education. Now, this is important for members of the General Assembly to have, and it's a tough map for us to look at. It's tough for me to look at. But those counties that are outlined in red, over 35% of your population over the age of 18 do not have a high school diploma. Those that are in red, over 35% of your population over the age of 18 do not have a high school diploma. Those in yellow, 20 to 35% do not have a high school diploma, and those in green, less than 20%. You can see our challenges are huge to build a workforce for Georgia that will attract companies and build our economic development. I report this to you and give it to you for your own information as we move to try to reach out to particularly those counties that have I can tell you, if you've got over 35% of your adult population that don't have a high school diploma, your chances of getting business to come to your community are going to be pretty slim. That's just an economic development fact. So we think this is important information. Added up, 1.3 million Georgians over the age of 18 do not have a high school diploma. We graduated 19,000, a little over 19,000 last year. Whatever the count is for the number of high school dropouts we had, we lost ground. I know we can't fix this year. because of the budget circumstances. But this is a huge challenge that the state must recognize and we must try to come to grips with. We will work hard to do that. We have a good, committed staff of faculty who work with these individuals every day. So adult education is a huge challenge for the state. TCSG works for business. Some of our best work is in economic development. This is a map that shows you what happened in 2010 with Quick Start projects. Those are projects where we worked with companies that were new or expanding companies. We had 174 projects last year. 68% were out of the metropolitan area of Atlanta. 29% came from international companies, and we worked with companies from 15 different companies, which tells you this is a global marketplace indeed. We had 97,500 plus trainees that were trained in the Quick Start program for those companies. We believe we created 8,880 jobs. We helped in creating those jobs with the Department of Economic Development, and we saved 3,864 jobs. This is a great investment. You spend about $12 million in state funds annually on this program. That's a great investment for an economic development, and the companies that we serve love this program. One of them is Kia. You've heard much about Kia, but it's only one of them. But Kia is now hiring what they call their third wave, their third shift of employees at their plant in West Point, Georgia. That will be somewhere between 1,200 and 1,500 additional employees, bringing the total to almost 5,000 employees. Not to mention what the suppliers, which actually the suppliers who supply the plant, which have moved here to Georgia and are providing the parts and the individual pieces that go into the automotive production, they've created more jobs than Kia. And what we've done for Kia is provide the training center, and we've trained every employee on the floor of that plant through the Georgia Quick Start program. Kia speaks very, very highly for what we have done in their workforce. In fact, we have letters from the chairman of Kia Georgia indicating that this is the finest workforce in opening a plant they've had. They achieved more 100% efficiency days at this plant as a startup than any in automotive history. We're quite proud of that service to Kia. They are a great partner with us. They're such a good partner, they gave us 20 of their new Sorentos to our college automotive programs. They gave us an award of 20 Kias. This is a photograph of that presentation ceremony. So our students are being trained on new Kia Sorento automobiles. Don't get excited. They're not driven on the highways. They're in the shops. They're for students to work on. We're very proud of that, and we're proud of the relationship with Kia. We have those kinds of relationships with many, many other companies. NCR, because of their relationship, beginning with Quick Start and continuing with their technical colleges in their area, we believe economic development, we're a key component of that economic development for Georgia. So jobs that happen in the community, things that happen outside of Quick Start in individual colleges happen every day and all over the state. A few things, Lanier Tech has a remarkable ammonia refrigeration program where we train ammonia refrigeration individuals from all over this country. And we make money on that because they pay us contract training dollars to come and take that course. It's about a 6-week course. We make a lot of money on ammonia refrigeration at Lanier Technical College, but it also serves Georgia and companies all over this country that can't get that ammonia refrigeration training anywhere else. Okefenokee Tech has developed a program in Georgia biomass because there are a number of companies that are opening down there that are creating biofuels from things like pine trees and other materials. So we've created a technical program in Georgia biomass at Okefenokee to support those companies that are building there to build the workforce they need. And Georgia Power and the electrical EMCs across the state have entered into electrical line workers apprentice program with our technical colleges, North Georgia, Okefenokee, DeKalb, South Georgia Tech, and West Georgia Technical College, among others, that train the electrical linemen for all of these electrical companies. And we have an aging workforce in the electrical companies, and Georgia Power will tell you we're one of their best partners for making that workforce happen for them and getting people good paying jobs. In that regard, we worked with 2,232 companies last year at our technical colleges to provide that kind of contract training for their companies. And I got to tell you, it's a good buy for the companies. If they had to go out and hire a training group to come in and do that training for them, or they had to hire them to have an internal training, this is a much better deal and a lower cost for them. And otherwise, they wouldn't come to us and ask us to do it. And we do it at all of our technical colleges, and we serve the companies that are in that community, and our economic development people are meeting with them on a weekly basis to make sure we're meeting their needs. And we believe we work for the taxpayers, and that our effectiveness and efficiency is a good thing for the taxpayers because we're very careful at how we spend their money. This is our economic impact in real dollars, not some multiplier economic model. This is real dollars. We put $359 million plus of federal dollars into those communities every day by paying for our programs and paying staff and faculty and purchasing equipment and things that we need through federal programs. The adult education GEDs that are awarded, those individuals that make that $7,000 plus more in dollars, they generate $172 million in our state economy. Once they get that, just those graduates from our GED get $172 million put more into our economy. Quick start jobs created. If you use the industry average for the average manufacturing wage from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of $29,990, and you multiply that times the number of jobs we created or saved, that's $382 million. That those people, and that's just an average salary. We know some of the people at Kia are making more than that. That's just an average. So $382 million for quick start jobs, and we know that our tech ed graduates have earned on average $3,799 more, $3,800 more after they graduated. You took that arithmetic to the number of graduates, that's $119.3 million, or a total economic impact of over $1 billion for your state investment of $300 million. We think that's a good deal for the state of Georgia. Now, how are we doing this? Tuition is an issue. Tuition is an issue both for us and both for Hope scholarships and Hope grant programs. We were the cheapest deal in town. In fact, we were too cheap for many years, I must tell you. And I believe, having been in state government for a number of years and at OPB previous to being at TCSG, I think we held our tuition artificially low in order not to impact Hope. But there comes a point in time when you have to come to reality. And I'll show you a different slide here in a moment. But you can see in the past 4 or 5 years we've had a significant increase. But I would submit to you $45 a credit hour is still a bargain at any organization, higher education organization. We likely will address that a little bit higher this year, and I'll explain that in a minute. But that's our history. There's no way we could operate today at $26 a credit hour. There's just no way we could. I think the Chancellor shared with you a similar chart. This is from the Southern Region Education Board on the tuition in the Southeast region states, and you can see the technical college, two-year colleges in Georgia are the next to last. Now, we've gotten some new 2010 data, draft data from them, which looks very much the same, but they haven't released it formally yet. So this is the 2008-2009. And you can see how we stack up tuition-wise, the annual cost of going to one of our colleges compared to any other colleges in the Southeast region. We believe we are still, even with the tuition increases we've had, a great bargain for our students. One way we've done this for taxpayers is the mergers that have been quite controversial at times, and I must tell you, really difficult to implement. But this was the map in 2008 that's on the left, and the new map in 2011. We've gone from 33 colleges to 26 colleges at a savings, administrative overhead savings of $6.2 million. That's something we had to do in order to keep money in the classrooms. While it was difficult and unnerving for some communities, and for some of you who had to go home and say they're merging our colleges, it was in fact the right thing to do, and it's been successful. Many of these communities who have gone through this have learned that they didn't lose their campus, they didn't lose their college, they just lost the way we administer it. And I must tell you, the administration of this is just as effective. In fact, we wouldn't have increased by 28.5% in our FTE if this wasn't working. And all campuses with the exception of one, Flint River, which was combined with Griffin Tech to make Southern Crescent. Flint River in Thomaston was the only campus that had an enrollment decline, and it was about 1%, 1 or 2%, 2%. It was very, very negligible, and we're not sure why that happened, but we know this. Everywhere else, this was a very, very successful program, and it was successful in Griffin and for them, and it will be as we move forward. We're proposing one more merger this year to save some more money. We're going to merge Sandersville Tech and Heart of Georgia Tech in Dublin and Sandersville. The map is on the next page. They do have geographical connection at two of the counties, but we likely will move Johnson County, which is a very small county, from southeastern Technical College's service delivery area into this to give them a contiguous boundary. And most of the students who attend the Technical College system from Johnson County already attend Heart of Georgia. So we are proposing one more merger that will take us from 26 colleges to 25 colleges. It will be known, and the two communities have come together, and the two boards of the college, they've selected the new name already, the Oconee Fall Line Technical College. And I must tell you, much to my shock, as much as it was unnerving when we talked to the communities about this impending merger, those two boards came together and sent me a letter supporting the merger of their two colleges. That is quite a different experience than we had in the previous time. But it is the right thing to do. And why is it the right thing to do? The technical education statewide average cost per student, FTE, in state funds is $2,313. I'm going to show you a slide in a minute at how much that's gone down. Sandersville right now, because of their small size and their high overhead, their cost per FTE is $4,478. And at Heart of Georgia, their FTE cost from state funds is $3,675. I must tell you that moving them closer to the state average by combining the two colleges is the right thing to do, just from an administrative standpoint. And this is the difference. This in state funds, the blue line at the bottom, shows you what our cost per FTE was. Now, mergers didn't do all of this. Some of this was just the high enrollment and the diminishing state funds. But in state funds, we had to do this in order to make this work. So our cost per FTE has gone from what was $4,478 statewide average to $2,313. And in total funds, when you include our federal funds and our tuition, we've gone from $7,027 down to $5,499. Now, to make that happen, we had to increase our tuition. We had to. And we had to make those kind of administrative changes in order to get the economies and the efficiencies to keep money in the classroom to serve the 190,000 students that showed up for technical education courses. One thing we're going to do that you will hear some about, but the board, our state board, has voted to implement, and we will in July 1st of this year. We're going from quarters to semesters. I talked to you a bit about it last year. It's a better alignment in our education enterprise here in Georgia with high schools and facilities in making dual enrollment and dual credit work. When you have a student who enrolls in high school and starts in the middle of August and has to wait for their college program or their college courses if they want to dually enroll in until middle September when we started our quarters, that's 4 to 5 to sometimes 6 weeks of a student waiting to get that course. Now, our colleges have worked with it, but it doesn't make much sense. The transferability of our courses in the technical college system with the other colleges and universities in Georgia and across this country, it makes better sense, and it's much more easy. You don't have to convert them from quarters to semesters. Some of our students get less credit, have to take additional courses when they go over, when they do take the transfer credit. So it's much easier for students, and it's better for students if those are all on the same semester number of hour kind of configurations. And you need to know we have a strong commitment to an efficient transition to semesters. I told you last year, and we discussed it with a number of the committees, that there is a long memory for many of you who watched our university system go through this transition, and it cost us a lot of money. We have a plan that, because of what we've learned from other systems and our university system, we have a plan on how we're going to make this happen. We're going to implement in fall of 2011. We are advising our students and have for the last 6 months on what it means to them individually. We've run a big public relations campaign. The tuition will be adjusted for the semester because it's a longer, more learning objectives. If we increase our tuition to $50 this year, which I predict we will for this coming year, when we translate that over to a semester, that'll be $75 a credit hour at the semester level. That compares favorably. It's less than any of our 2-year colleges or 4-year colleges in the university system. It will still be a good buy. And it will be a zero neutral impact on Hope, because if you take 3 full semesters, it will be the same money as taking 4 full quarters. We believe the enrollment increase because of the economy and the stabilization of that enrollment will help us make it through this. We think it's important to have continued workforce or workload adjustment funding. I know it's not recommended by the governor, and we'll talk about that momentarily, and I know how difficult the budget is this year, but that would be helpful. And then the efficiencies that the colleges implement themselves to carry over tuition revenue and fee revenue, which you graciously gave us the authority to do, will be important for us to be successful. The Hope overview, as you debate what to do with Hope, and we know we have to do something with Hope. The students receiving Hope, this chart shows you the technical college system, the university system, and private colleges. This is only for post-secondary education, not for pre-K. But 52% of those receiving Hope are attending technical colleges, 41% are attending university system colleges, and 7% are attending private colleges. But our students get 25% of the funds. The university system gets 65% of the funds, and private colleges get 8%. So while we have 52% of the students, we only have 20% of the Hope dollars, 25% of the Hope dollars. It's a good bang for the Hope buck in the Hope grant program. As you debate and discuss what to do with Hope, and we agree that we must do something and the technical college system must participate in that, we want you to know that it is a good bang for the buck with the Hope grant program. So our budget request is tough because we started with $319 million, almost $320 million from your appropriation in HB 948. This is what's happened to state funding, and we are down to 40% of our operating dollars come from state funds. In tech ed, that's 38%. And in this chart, the stimulus dollars are not counted as state funds. They're counted as federal dollars because those are going away. But that's where we are in state funding at 40%. The amended FY 2011 budget recommendation, we started at 319. The governor has recommended a reduction of 4%, which is $307 million. That's a loss of $12.6 million. As painful as it is, you won't hear screaming and gnawing of teeth from us. We will make that happen. We've been operating at 4% less since the beginning of the fiscal year and are prepared to continue that through the time. Our credit hour growth, which is driving our enrollment, our workload adjustment, our enrollment growth funding formula dollars, we have grown in 2000 from 2.2 million to 4.4 million credit hours. That's a 100% increase in the past 10 years. That's a 26% increase just last year between 2009 and 2010. The credit hours grew by 25.8%, 34,500 new students, 900,000 more credit hours than we had in 2009. We're projecting probably around a 10% increase this year. We do not see the enrollment declining at this point in time. Our summer enrollment growth was 12.3%. It looks like about 9% for our fall quarter over last year's record enrollment. So we can predict to you that we likely will continue to grow for the foreseeable future. The workload increase then that is earned by our funding formula, if you count those 4.4 million credit hours, is 60.3, almost $60.4 million. And the new space that we opened in new buildings, square footage is another 2.5 for a $62.9 million enrollment growth, which is important, but we know the financial condition of the state. This is what it would look like. If you had $382 million, I'm sure you would appropriate that to us. But I'm sure that you don't have $382 million to give to us. You can see the recommendation does not, the governor's rec does not recommend any of that enrollment growth. I know that's not because the governor believes we didn't earn it or don't deserve it for the great work that's done by our faculties and staffs at our 26 colleges, but the facts are that the revenue is just not there, and the recommendation is for a little bit under $300 million in total. That represents a 6% reduction for us. The capital outlay recommendation, $43.6 million. Most of it is MR&R and equipment dollars. There is one project at Southern Crescent Technical College in Henry County for $5.4 million that the governor has recommended. It was on our list. And then finally a $10 million recommendation for continuation of career academies for a total of $43.6. That is less than half of what would be a normal year, but we also understand the limitations. Bottom line, we understand and we get it. The ways that you cut cost in this environment are well known, but I've got to tell you they're difficult to implement. You got to cut payroll expense, you got to increase output per unit of labor, you got to eliminate marginal product lines, and you have to consolidate administrative functions and reduce overhead. Any business person in this room knows that's the way you save money and make it work. And we did it. We hired adjunct professors at lower pay with no benefits. 72% of our faculty now is adjunct part-time faculty. That's not a good thing, but it's the only way we can deliver instruction to 190,000 students. We've increased class sizes where we can, except for those programs like nursing that have limitations of classes. Any other class, we've loaded to capacity and put as many desks as you can squeeze into a room. We eliminated 348 marginal programs. Those are programs that they're not high job availability, that the likelihood of an individual completing that program would probably not be a job there waiting for them, and the enrollments in those programs are very, very low, that we can't justify keeping instructors in those programs. I can provide you a list of those programs, but 348 marginal programs were eliminated under this budget circumstance. We merged colleges to reduce overhead and put resources into instruction rather than administration. We have been as efficient and as effective as you would expect us to be, and as we are proud to be, but I must tell you, we cannot replicate these savings forever. If our enrollment continues to go up, the only way we have to go right now, and we're appreciative as a state agency that we have the ability to impact our tuition and our revenues, but we will have to adjust revenues upward and tuition upward. I still think $50 a credit hour is a great buy. On the semester system, $75 is a great buy. But the bottom line is we understand it, we get it, we've done it, we're proud of it. I comment and recommend to you the presidents who are in the back of the room. Many of our presidents have joined us today who have managed these colleges so well. I'd ask them to stand up real quickly and just be recognized for their great work. We could take an aerial view of our campuses and show you people parking cow pastures now in order to get to our technical colleges to get a job. That's my presentation. I'll be glad to take any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Just from someone that has to do that pretty often, I don't mind parking in cow pasture. It's not a bad way.
It's not a bad way. We make it work.
We've got a few questions, and I'm going to ask our members if they would kind of keep them short. We're crunched up on time just a little bit. First is Representative Peake.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm over here, Commissioner. Yes. Thank you for your leadership. I think we can be darn proud of the technical college system we have, so thank you for that. I've got a question for you. I have a son-in-law who's in the technical college in Macon.
Yes.
And he came home and told me a story, that there are a lot of the students that are in the class who are on the Hope Scholarship who also may be receiving Pell Grant. Mm-hmm. That yes. Halfway through the semester, when they get their Pell Grant check, that they drop out of the classroom. And my question for you is, in light of the fact that we're trying to fight like crazy to allocate our Hope scholarships, is this an isolated incident, or is this something that's happening at every technical college across our state, and is it a problem that we need to address and look at?
I don't believe it is a widespread problem. To suggest to you that there's not a student that will show up on our campus, or some of them that will try to game us on this, it has occurred. Our presidents and our financial aid officers are fully aware that that may and can and sometimes does happen. We try to police it to the best we can. I will be glad to take a look at the cases that you know of if we've missed some. I can tell you the Hope Grant and the Pell Grant, our Hope Grant and the Pell Grant together, is a great deal for an individual going to our colleges. It's a great deal. And there are some that would believe that if you qualify for Pell, which is needs-based and income-based to qualify for Pell. There are some that would say that perhaps we could eliminate the Hope Grant for those that qualify for Pell and save some Hope Grant money. But if you do, you disenfranchise those low-income people from the Hope Grant because they can get Pell. I would be reluctant to say that's a good plan for us. However, the Pell, which we've gotten more Pell money than we've ever had before, we've had a great influx of Pell, and that's a good thing for our students, and it's helped us reach this 190,000 student threshold. We are critically aware of those who might try to game and walk away with money in their pockets. If they do, we try to get them.
if I can just follow up, and I appreciate that. I'm not in any way would disenfranchise those who really need it. I am asking directly, though, that is there enough substantial amount of money and waste that even fraud in some respects from folks who are getting the Hope Scholarship? Is there enough money there, in your opinion, that is something we need to worth looking at?
I don't believe it's widespread enough for us to start dealing with it on a policy level, and we are fully aware, and our financial aid offices understand that if students drop right after they've gotten their Pell money, we're probably going to go try to get them.
Representative Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner,
yes, sir, Representative.
I also am one that thinks that you're the best deal in town and appreciate everything you do within the technical group. My question is somewhat close to what Representative Peake talked about. One of my concerns with the Hope Scholarship is I look at all users of it, and I don't have the statistics in front of me, but I know in the university system, one of my concerns is the large percentage of people that use the Hope and never finish college. They use it for a year or two. Can you give me some kind of an idea, looking at your Hope, the 25% of Hope funding that you receive or that's used on your awards and graduates using those two criteria, what type of percentage success or pass rate or completion rate that you do actually receive? So when you receive that 25% of the Hope money, what are we getting for that?
I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but we do have it, and it is a positive number that you would be pleased with on a completion rate of those that get the Hope Grant. Remember, the Hope Grant is for technical certificates of credit and diplomas, not for associate degrees. Those are shorter-term programs that lead people to jobs, and the chances of them completing their TCCs is much higher. Quite frankly, those individuals that come to us to get that job or get that technical certificate of credit tend to be very appreciative of the Hope Grant and the Pell dollars that they may get to enable them to do that. So there's a motivation level among those students that our completion rates are good. I can get you exactly what that number is. I don't have it over the top of my head, but we'll get that for you.
Representative Roger Williams.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon.
I think I'm probably in the area up there where there's been a lot of conversation, some of those heated conversations you're talking about in Dalton, Whitfield County. Dalton State College had a technical program going, resisted giving it up. The state built us a facility up there called the Career Academy, which would be used for technical education. I'm disappointed that that languished and had not been effective. I understand now that we're in a position, Dalton State is willing to give up the technical end of it, turn the funds over to y'all. I don't know. I want to get out of that red
yes, sir.
map up there,
yes,
and lower our highest unemployment rate in the state of Georgia.
Right.
Where do we stand with that, and what do we need to do to get this thing going? Because we need something going.
We're finalizing the memorandum of understanding, dissolving the relationship of the technical division between us and Dalton State. Georgia Northwestern will be taking over that technical division into their service delivery area by, I believe, the fall. Is that correct, Craig? By the fall of this coming year. They will finish out the year at Dalton State. We will teach out those students that are enrolled in some programs at Dalton State. We will pick up the program starting in the fall of next year, and Georgia Northwestern will have Whitfield and Murray County in their service delivery area and provide those technical programs for that area, as well as working with the high schools in the area on that career academy.
What will you take over the Career Academy? What's the status of the Career Academy?
The Career Academy will be with the local school system, but we are working with the superintendents there to have a presence in the Career Academy and have faculty and staff in that Career Academy working in conjunction with the schools from Georgia Northwestern Technical College.
Anything I can do, we can do up there. I'd like to get this thing going because we need it real bad.
We are working real hard on it, sir. Thank you for the question.
And Representative Chokas for a short question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Jackson, thank you for the good work that you do. We're very proud of South Georgia Tech in my hometown of Americus. And the college foundations that were encouraged to be created several years ago have annual giving programs, and I was wondering if you could speak to the success of the foundations in their goal of attracting funds, and also on any matches that were being done in the past for contributions.
We are still having a equipment match for monies that come in from various donations to the college, and we use that and match that money with some of our equipment money. So there has to be some donations for the equipment dollars that we have in state dollars at the local college level, and the foundations help us manage that. But the foundations have grown significantly, although I would still consider most of our foundations, with the exception of maybe 3 or 4, still somewhat in a infancy stage of really reaching the potential that they have. But we had $25 million in assets about 5 years ago. We're well over $50 million in assets in those college foundations at this point in time. Some of them have been exceedingly successful. Columbus Tech, over $12 million toward their medical science building was raised locally and by their foundation. So those kinds of successes are beginning to happen for technical colleges. Sometimes I think our presidents and we have been working hard in working those foundations to new levels of success. It can help us, not so much in operating dollars, but in equipment and in physical facilities. And that would lower the burden of the state to support our colleges in many cases. We will be continuing to train our presidents and our faculty and staff on raising dollars. Many times our challenge was we just didn't have the sophistication to know exactly how to do the ask. We have as good a relationship with business communities and businesses in our communities probably as any organization in state government. That's not a slam on our presidents. It's just that we raised money in ways that didn't generate as much money as I think we have the ability to raise. We will be aggressive in that as we go forward. Going from $25 million to over $50 million is great success, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have $200 million. So we'll continue the hard work to do that.
Commissioner, that's all the questions I see.
I appreciate the opportunity to present to you, and thank you all for your great support over the years.
Thank you very much.
We have one more presentation this afternoon, and I'm sure she's as anxious as we are to be done with that after everyone's sat here all day very attentively. And we'll ask the judge if she will come on forward and make her presentation related to the Superior Court. Judge, thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you, and I appreciate your timeliness today. I'm Kathy Goslin, and I'm this year's president of the Council of Superior Court Judges. I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you and talk about our budget and answer some questions. I do want to spend just a few minutes giving you a little outline of our budget and then go through the numbers with you that you have in front of you. You've been passed out an outline of both the fiscal year 11 amended and the fiscal year 12 budget. The Superior Court's budget is broken into 3 main categories, as you can see. There are the district court administrators. There are 10 of those. They each have a secretary. There's the council office here in Atlanta. And then there's the judicial section. The DCAs there have been 10 DCAs for a very long time with one staff person. They stretch across the state of Georgia, and they do many functions for the judges in their districts. From fiscal year 2007 to 2011, the operating funds included in their budget have been reduced by 52%. Our council office here in Atlanta has been reduced from 15 staff members to 11 staff members and is currently operating at the 1995 budget level. Both of those administrative categories comprise only 5.8% of our total budget. So the majority of the budget is the judicial salaries, the travel expenses, which have been cut by 37%, the secretary and law clerk salaries, a small amount for senior judges, and we appreciate the amount that the General Assembly put in last year for senior judges, and just a tiny bit for equipment. Each time that we have been asked since 2009 to cut our budget, we have done so. Consequently, we only have a very small amount left for the use of senior judges and only $10,000 for equipment. A 4% reduction in the fiscal year 11 and a 6% reduction in the fiscal year 12 budget cannot be accomplished without devastating effects to court staff and senior judge use. We really don't have any operating money left. We understand how difficult your job is in these tight economic times. We have come together as a group so that all of the chief judges in the circuits that qualify for a new judge with the numbers have agreed not to ask for a new judgeship this year in recognition of how hard those economic times are. On the other hand, the legislation that you passed last year, which increased filing fees, has generated an additional $17.3 million for the state revenue since July 1st of 2010 until today. So with those comments, I'd like to turn to the handout that you have. If you look at the fiscal year amended budget, this is the 4% reduction plan that we would propose if we have to do this. Under the judicial administrative districts, we would have to incorporate 6 furlough days. That would be for the district court administrators and for their staff, which is each have a secretary. Under the Superior Court judges budget, we would reduce the funds for senior judge usage, which would still leave us with some small amount of money to use senior judges. We would impose 3 furlough days for secretaries, law clerks, and court administrators. We would reduce funds for 3 vacant law clerk positions. We would change the Westlaw and Lexis payment. If you ask me about that or the habeas record storage payment, I'll have to get Charles, our budget administrator, to answer it because I don't really understand it, but it's some one-time thing we can do. We would reduce travel funds associated with judicial education to match the fiscal year 11 projected expenses. This is because the way we arranged our contract with ICJE for this year. And we would reduce fringe costs for vacant judgeships in July and August. All the vacant judgeships were filled by the beginning of October. Under the council office budget, we would reduce funding for 1 position. That leaves the 11 positions. If you look at the fiscal year 12 budget, with our suggestions on the 6% reduction. If you look at the judicial administrative districts, it would mean 12 furlough days. There would also need to be an increase in funds to reflect an adjustment in the employer share of the employee's retirement system. I understand that this was not added by the Office of Planning and Budget to the judicial branch budgets. So we would need these added. They were added to the executive branch agencies, but not to the judicial branch agencies. So we would have to add this in to comply with the new amount that is reflected on your sheet here. On the Superior Court judge budget, for a 6% reduction, we would have to reduce the funds for senior judge use, leaving only $194,000, which is very minimal and would just cover a basic emergency of a senior judge. We would reduce funds for 3 vacant law clerk positions, and we would impose 12 furlough days for secretaries, law clerks, and court administrators. Then you see here the increase in funds for both ERS and JRS because of the share needed for the employer amount. On the council budget, the Council of Superior Court Judge budgets, we would reduce funding for 1 position. That's the full position. And reduce personal services funds for annual leave payout that we've had to pay before. And so that would leave a small amount in that fund. And then there is, again, a small adjustment upward for the ERS employer share. All right. Questions?
You say that apprehensively. We do have a couple questions. Senator Seabaugh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you please, when we add a new judgeship,
yes,
could you please detail what it is in the cost of a judgeship, what is made up of that cost, and can you explain also that in today's date, when we have that cost per judgeship, how that differs with what we used to add when we added a judgeship, say, 10, 15 years ago? My understanding there's a difference. Could you explain that, please?
Well, I'm going to have to get staff to help with that, but I'll start. The judgeship includes the judge and the judge salary. It includes a law clerk if that circuit doesn't already have one. Okay, that was what's taken out. So there isn't a law clerk anymore. There was a law clerk 10 years ago, so that must be the change that you were discussing. So now it is just an assistant district attorney, a judge, a secretary, and travel expense for that judge. Is there any equipment cost?
Initial equipment.
An initial equipment setup.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up. My understanding, the law clerk was not what we funded before, but now is included in the price of a judgeship.
No, it was taken out 3 years ago.
They were taken out in the 3 new judgeships that were created.
The 3 new judgeships that were just created do not have a law clerk attached. Before that, there were law clerks attached to the judgeships. That was also a relatively recent phenomenon, though. Before that, there weren't. I think that there have been several shifts now. The most recent shift, though, is that there is no law clerk that is funded by the General Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Underman.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming down. I have 2 questions and a follow-up on this question. Isn't it true that local governments, different counties, provide calendar clerks and law clerks, and that different counties are operated differently, so you may have a different status in adjoining counties?
Yes, there's a wide disparity, as a matter of fact. Rural counties rely on the district court administrator to do a lot of the work. They may have 1 law clerk for 4, 5, 6 judges, whereas in more urban settings, the counties have picked up costs for more positions. So there is a wide disparity among how the judges' offices run in the state.
Right. I know in my particular county, in Gwinnett County, we have calendar clerks, and it's a very sophisticated operation.
Yes.
My second question is about the mental health courts, and I know that you know I'm interested in that. There's a lot of legislators interested in that. When that, and I know the new governor has mentioned it in his State of the State that he's very interested in it, and I hope it comes to fruition. So when that goes into a particular county, it's my understanding that it's kind of offered up and a judge chooses to be assigned to that. Is that right?
It depends on the particular circuit. In our circuit, for instance, where we have one, I was interested, and so I participated in, and there was a grant initially from the state to do that through the Department of Corrections. Other circuits have done those without any money, or they've worked with their mental health group there, their community service board, and sort of managed one. Now our county picks up the cost for ours. It just depends on the circuit. We're hoping to drop some legislation this year that would enable mental health courts in every circuit. Of course, you can always do it as a special docket, but we hope to have an enabling legislation this year for that.
May I ask another question? My particular question about it is the caseload.
Yes.
You're not increasing a caseload. In actuality, you're just shifting the caseload of those particular cases to one judge. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
The man that knows of which he speaks, Senator Crosby.
Judge, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And as an ex-Superior Court judge, isn't it true that you really need all the money we can rake to scrape to keep this court system going?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe I take that back.